LoveLore Library. Chapter 973. Maybe 30% of it was fate, but 70% of it depended on her own efforts. If she didn't fight for it, she would never get what she wanted. She wasn't someone who would go with the flow and submit to fate. Shinjioli let out a rare laugh. Good, you're ambitious. Ning Shuema had never heard him laugh before, so she couldn't help but look back. The Almighty was so beautiful when he laughed, as if countless flowers were falling with his laughter. She was stunned for a moment. Once Shinjioli revealed his true colors, many people would be stunned. When others were stunned, he only felt annoyed, so he wore a mask all year round. But Ning Shuema was stunned, and he only felt happy. He lowered his head and kissed her slightly open mouth. Are you stunned? Almighty, you look so good when you laugh. You should smile more. Ning Shuema couldn't help but suggest. One smile could overturn a city, and 2 smiles could overturn a country. This was referring to him. In your eyes, I'm beautiful. Shinjioli remained calm. Ning Shuema nodded generously and praised him generously. Beautiful. Then, compared to that Stallone. He didn't forget that her idol was that muscular man. How did he know that her idol was Stallone? She thought for a moment. I think, you're as beautiful as him. Shinjioli's face didn't look good. He had seen Stallone's appearance in her illusion, and in his eyes, he was a boorish man. Shinjioli's appearance was far better than Stallone's. This little girl was good at everything, but her sense of beauty was a bit strange. He was too lazy to argue with her. At least in her heart, he was comparable to her idol, which was a big improvement. He quickly combed her messy hair and used a cleansing spell on her body. Then, he helped her tidy up her messy dress. Thus, Ning Shuema once again became beautiful and was no longer in a sorry state. Ning Shuema took the mirror that the Almighty handed to her and looked at herself. She nodded in satisfaction. The Almighty was so skillful with his hands. The way he styled her hair was simply too beautiful. She looked beautiful and playful, which was in line with her usual style. Was the Almighty's ability to comb his hair innate? He didn't look like a novice. There seemed to be a messy image flashing through her mind. Supreme Divinity, can you help me comb my hair? No. You're so capable. You'll be able to learn it quickly. Help me comb it. Are you my maid, or am I your servant? Of course I'm your maidservant. But if your maidservant goes out with a messy hairstyle, won't it be embarrassing for you? An inexplicable conversation that seemed to have crossed thousands of cliffs and tens of thousands of ravines, traversed mountains, and waded through rivers to arrive at Ning Shuema's mind. She couldn't help but be startled. She frowned and was about to think carefully, but the voice disappeared in her mind again. She couldn't find it. Shinjioli pressed her shoulder. What are you daydreaming about again? Ning Shuema turned around and hugged his hand. She blurted out, Almighty, did we know each other before? Why do you ask? Shinjioli turned her around and combed her bangs. I don't know why, but I feel that we used to know each other before. She couldn't help but think of Baoyu's words to Daiyu in Dream of the Red Chamber, I've seen this sister before. She was also embarrassed. She was from the modern era, so how could she have known the Almighty before? Chapter 974. This thought of hers was rather nonsensical. So after Ning Shuema casually asked this question, she threw this thought to the back of her mind. Shinjioli's expression changed slightly. After seeing her grow up, he also had an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Was this fate? Or was it a coincidence? He didn't say anything, so Ning Shuema didn't ask anymore. She occasionally turned her head and saw the white cloud beside her fly past her like a whirlwind. In the blink of an eye, it was far behind her. God, this speed. It was much faster than Kieran's top speed. The Almighty was indeed the Almighty. He chatted with her and even did her hair for her. He could even do it so quickly. What was even rarer was that she couldn't feel any wind or even any vibration. She almost suspected that if she put a cup of water on the cloud, it wouldn't spill out. She looked around again and didn't see Kieran's shadow. He must have been left far behind by the Almighty. This kind of ability was indeed a little abnormal, no wonder he could surpass everyone. He really had the ability. Great God, when will I be able to cultivate to the same level as you? Ning Xuema felt envious. Work hard. Shinjioli hugged her as they sat on the cloud and watched the clouds move. At least cultivate to Earth rank level 8 as soon as possible. He added this sentence in his heart. He didn't want to think about his previous life. He only wanted to grasp the present. He only wanted to hold her in his arms. Ning Xuema was faintly sleepy in his arms. She really didn't have much time to rest recently. Sleep if you're sleepy. I'll wake you up when we arrive. Shinjioli's fingers played with her eyelashes. Oh. It was rare for her to be so obedient. She arched in his arms and fell asleep without worry. The red wedding dress was neatly folded on the spring stool. There was a phoenix coronet on it. The coronet was inlaid with various gems that sparkled brightly. Yen Ziyuan sat in front of the dressing table and looked at the reflection in the mirror. She was lost in thought. Miss, this is the wedding dress that Master sent 100 top embroiderers to prepare for you. Do you like it? The little maid beside her, was full of joy. Do you like it? Yen Ziyuan raised her hand to touch the fabric of the wedding dress. The smooth fabric was as soft as water in her palm. She should like it, right? She was finally going to marry the man she liked. How could she not like it? She had been looking forward to this day even in her dreams. Tomorrow, she would be able to wear this phoenix coronet and robe and become the bride of her beloved. She should be very happy, but she felt like she had lost something in her heart, and she was a little distracted. As the day of the wedding approached, she was even a little scared and had a desire to escape. Miss, you seem a little unhappy. She was keenly aware of her mood. He thought for a moment and said, Miss, you don't have to worry about Rong Yen. She would only be married in 3 days, and Child Gu would only take her as a concubine. She wouldn't even be considered a co-wife. No matter what, she is still below you. When she enters the door, she has to kowtow to you and offer you tea. Yen Ziyuan's fingers froze on the wedding dress. She slowly withdrew her hand. Yes, Gu Ziyan had told her that he owed Rong Yan's father a favor. He had promised Rong Yan's father that he would take care of her for the rest of her life. In other words, he had to marry Rong Yan. Of course, that day, Gu Ziyan also said that the one he liked the most was Yen Ziyuan, so he wanted to marry her as his wife. As for Rong Yan, he could only pity her and take her as his concubine. Chapter 975. He said that he would only marry the 2 of them in this lifetime and would not marry a third one. He told her not to worry, being able to marry Gu Ziyan was something that she had longed for even in her dreams. Unfortunately, the falling flower had always been the heartless brook. Gu Ziyan had always been cold to her. She really did not expect that after a zither recital, Gu Ziyan's attitude towards her would suddenly change so much that he would personally propose marriage. Although Gu Ziyan was born poor, he had used his abilities to earn a lot of money for his family. Although proposing marriage to the daughter of the city's governor was out of his league, it would not be a disgrace to her. Not to mention that Yen Ziyuan was very willing, so City Lord Yen agreed without hesitation. The marriage was set. After Yen Ziyuan agreed, Gu Ziyan seemed to be afraid that she would change her mind and sent people to set the wedding date. From the proposal to the wedding, there was only half a month's time. Yen Ziyuan really felt that it was a bit rushed, but since she was marrying her sweetheart, it did not matter how rushed it was. In this half a month, Daliang City was full of joy. Everyone knew that the governor's beloved daughter was about to get married. The Yen residence was unusually busy. Yen Ziyuan was dragged by people every day to either get her clothes measured or try on various accessories. She was so busy that she did not have any free time. However, in the midst of the joy, she was always a little distracted. She always felt like she had forgotten something and would occasionally feel inexplicably anxious and depressed. She had also asked her wet nurse for advice. Her wet nurse told her that this was a normal emotion for a girl before marriage and that there was no need to take it to heart. She also felt that she probably minded that Gu Ziyin still wanted to take Rong Yen as a concubine, so she would occasionally feel uncomfortable. Forget it, being able to marry him was already a rare blessing for her. If he wanted to take another concubine, she could only endure it. At most, after marriage, she and that woman would mind their own business. Miss, that day on the ship, the only reason you were able to escape was all thanks to Child Gu's bravery. I heard that Child Gu was injured because of that incident. It can be seen that he still has you in his heart, so you don't have to mind that woman, Rong Yen. She chattered on. On a boat. Yen Ziyuan rubbed her forehead. Just as he was about to say something, the candlelight in the room suddenly dimmed and a figure appeared out of thin air. She was shocked. She opened her mouth and was about to shout, "Assassin." But before she could even open her mouth, that person pointed at her out of thin air. Her vision turned black, and she fell limply onto the chair and fainted. Yen Ziyuan was also shocked, but after seeing who it was, she blurted out, "Shue shue." It was Ning Xuemo. The great god's speed was very fast, and he arrived at Daliang City when the sky turned dark. Ning Xuemo first asked around in the city, and all she heard was that Miss Yen was getting married. As expected, Yen Ziyuan was going to marry Gu Ziyin. Tomorrow was the day of their wedding. When the people in the city talked about the two of them, they were full of praises, saying that they were a match made in heaven. Ning Xuemo had heard too many of these words in the past 2 hours. She did not manage to find out any valuable information. However, she heard from the people that they occasionally saw Miss Yen go out, and they saw that she was always beaming and very happy. From what the people said, Yen Ziyuan did not seem to be forced into this marriage. Shinjioli had been by her side the whole time. Of course, when he appeared, he was using the identity of Han Shangyue. He used a spell to blur his face, so no one could see his face clearly. Chapter 976. Of course, this did not include Ning Xuemo. She could still see him very clearly. The Almighty was born with an aura that kept people away. Although people were very curious about him, they did not dare to get close to him. Even when he was around, people did not even dare to speak loudly and automatically kept quiet. Because of this, Ning Xuemo did not hear a lot of gossip. What she needed to hear the most now was gossip. Many truths were hidden in gossip, therefore, after Ning Xuemo wandered around the streets without any results, she decided to look for Yen Ziyuan directly. Only by looking at the person involved could she determine what went wrong. The Almighty's aura was too cold. Ning Xuemo was afraid that he would startle Yen Ziyuan, so she asked the Almighty to hide himself temporarily and let her appear alone. At that time, the Almighty seemed to be a little unhappy. She went to see her good friend but hid him, as if he could not be seen. Ning Xuemo probably sensed the Almighty's unhappiness, so she coaxed him, "Almighty, your aura is too strong. I'm afraid that any woman who sees you will go crazy." Ahem, even her best friends are no exception. Isn't there a saying, guard against fire, theft, and best friends? What if my best friend falls in love with you too? I don't want to be stolen away. Her nonsense worked a lot on Shinjuli. He rubbed her head and smiled. What you mean is, have you fallen in love with me too? Don't worry, although there are many women who like me, you are the only one. After saying this, he left contentedly. After Ning Xuema entered Yan Ziyuan's house, she saw him sitting in the hall opposite. He rested his chin on his hand and looked like he was watching a show. Of course, he was invisible, and only she could see him. The teams of night patrollers who occasionally flashed by below would not be able to see him. Shwe shwe, you're finally out of danger. That was filtered out by evil people. I have been very worried. Father also sent many soldiers out, but there has been no news. Was it Heavenly Master who saved you and brought you back? Yan Ziyuan pulled Ning Xuema's hand and chatted with her like a bamboo tube pouring beans. Her concern was evident in her words. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She had suspected that Yan Ziyuan had amnesia, but now it didn't seem like it. Was she really willing to marry Gu Ziyan? She congratulated Yan Ziyuan and briefly told her how she got out of her predicament. Of course, she emphasized Yifeng. As she spoke, she secretly observed Yan Ziyuan's expression. When Yan Ziyuan heard Yifeng's name, she frowned slightly and said, so he's also out of danger. Then, she didn't mention it again. Her expression was as if Yifeng was just a normal person and her secret guard. She didn't seem to be particularly concerned about him and couldn't see any abnormalities. Back on the ship, Ning Xuema was detained by Shui Lan. She couldn't see the situation outside, so she didn't know about the interaction between Yan Ziyuan and Yifeng. She also didn't know about their subsequent development. When she was with Yan Ziyuan, she saw Yan Ziyuan's feelings for Gu Ziyan. Even a blind person could see that Yan Ziyuan liked Gu Ziyan. So at this moment, even after analyzing it in her heart, Ning Xuema didn't feel that there was anything strange about Yan Ziyuan marrying Gu Ziyan. She chatted with Yan Ziyuan for a while. After beating around the bush for a long time, she didn't find anything wrong. Instead, she found out some inside information about Yifeng's visit to the Yan Manor 3 years ago. Chapter 977. It was said that Yifeng had asked City Lord Yan to be Yan Ziyuan's personal bodyguard the moment he arrived. Because City Lord Yan didn't know his background, he didn't dare to agree. Yifeng forced City Lord Yan to eat a type of poison and threatened to give him the antidote every 6 months. Finally, he achieved his goal. These 3 years, City Lord Yan lived in fear, afraid that he would harm his daughter. This time, after Yifeng's accident, Yan Ziyuan returned home and City Lord Yan told her the truth. Only then did Yan Ziyuan know that her father had been threatened with drugs for 3 years. When Yan Ziyuan and Ning Xuema talked about this matter, there was a sense of disgust towards Yifeng in her words, which made Ning Xuema speechless. Thinking about how Yifeng had risked his life to protect her in exchange for this result, Ning Xuema also felt a bit sad. In love, it wasn't about who sacrificed more for the other party to win love. From ancient times until now, the most heartbreaking thing was this kind of unrequited love. No matter how much Yifeng sacrificed for Yan Ziyuan, if she didn't like him, there was nothing he could do. There was no reason to say anything. However, when Ning Xuema heard the disgust towards Yifeng in Yan Ziyuan's tone, she still felt a bit uncomfortable. She felt that it was unfair for Yifeng. Thus, she said a few words for Yifeng. Ziyuan, ever since Yifeng became your bodyguard, has he ever harmed you in the slightest? Has he ever tried to harm you? Yan Ziyuan was stunned. She thought for a moment and shook her head. No. After a short pause, she said, but he used drugs to control my father, perhaps he had no other choice. Is there anything wrong with City Lord Yan's body? Ning Xuema's expression was serious. Yan Ziyuan paused for a moment, then shook her head. Father's spirit has always been very good, but this is only because father agreed to his conditions, and he gave him the antidote in time. If you don't agree, the consequences will be unimaginable. Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile. Ziyuan, any poison in this world is harmful to the human body. Even if the antidote is given in time, it will still cause some irreversible damage. It's impossible for people to not notice it, and your father is still hale and hearty. This only proves that he hasn't been poisoned. The medicine that Yi Feng gave him might not be poison. It might just be some ordinary nutritional medicine that he used to scare your father. Ning Xuema had seen City Lord Yan before. That person walked with vigor, and he was in good spirits. How was it possible that he was poisoned? Ning Xuema was a famous doctor, after all, so she could tell. It didn't matter if Yan Ziyuan didn't love Yi Feng, but Ning Xuema didn't want Yan Ziyuan to continue misunderstanding Yi Feng. Yan Ziyuan was clearly shaken by this explanation. She stared blankly for a while before finally letting out a long sigh. I hope so. I was worried about my father's antidote in half a year, but it seems that I don't have to worry about it anymore. But I don't understand. Why did Yi Feng do this? We didn't even know each other 3 years ago, so why did he scheme to become my personal hidden guard? Ning Xuema sighed. Because in your previous life, you were his younger sister. She originally wanted to say his sweetheart, but then she remembered that Yan Ziyuan was about to get married, and that it wouldn't be appropriate to talk about Yi Feng's deep love for her, so she changed her words at the last minute. Yan Ziyuan's eyes widened. What do you mean? Ning Xuema told her what she heard from Yi Feng about the entanglement between him and Yan Ziyuan in their previous life. Chapter 978. Ning Xuema told her what she had heard from Yi Feng about the entanglement between him and Yan Ziyuan in their previous lives. Yan Ziyuan looked as if she was listening to a heavenly book. After listening to Ning Xuema's words, she paused for a moment and her face turned slightly red. So I fell in love with Mr. Gu in my previous life. For him, I didn't hesitate to suffer the pain of having my legs separated. Ning Xuema. A woman in love is really scary. Her focus is always on her lover. What do you think of Yi Feng in your previous life? Ning Xuema asked what she wanted to know. Yan Ziyuan lowered her eyes slightly and muttered to herself for a moment. Then, she said faintly, Yi Feng is a good brother. He has done enough for me at that time, and I am grateful to him. However, the previous life is the previous life, and this life is this life. In this life, he and I are of different races. I only hope that he will not disturb me again. At this point, Ning Xuema had nothing else to say. She chatted with Yan Ziyuan for a while longer before she left. Before she left, Ning Xuema did not forget to unseal Shi Er's acupoints and return everything to normal. She flew out and met up with Shinjiuli. How is it? Shinjiuli pulled her to sit on the roof. Ning Xuema shook her head. She is willing. I can't see anything strange. Shinjiuli's eyes flashed slightly. He held her hand and said, since that is the case, you can let go. Let's go. Ning Xuema thought for a moment. Wait. She glanced at a dark corner and paused for a moment. Then, she waved her hand in that direction. A moment later, a man in black who almost blended into the night appeared in front of Ning Xuema. Nimble movements and a handsome face, it was Yi Feng, whom she had not seen for several days. He was much thinner than before, and his face was as pale as snow. He cupped his hands towards Ning Xuema and said, Thank you, Miss Ning. He knew that Ning Xuema had come for him. He had also heard the conversation between her and Yan Ziyuan in the room. Ning Xuema looked at him. Have you been by her side all this time? Yi Feng pursed his lips and did not answer. Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh. Yifeng, I think it's time for you to let go. Sometimes, letting go was a form of fulfillment, and it was also an expression of love. Otherwise, it would only cause more trouble for the other party. Yifeng slightly lowered his eyes. I will let go, after she obtains true happiness. His tone was firm, but his voice was slightly trembling. He let go of his hands to fulfill her happiness, but who would fulfill his happiness? Ning Xuema saw him like this and felt a little sad. She couldn't bear to see him like this, so she pointed outside. Yifeng, we haven't seen each other in a long time. Why don't you go out for a drink with me? That day, it was Yifeng who helped her walk out of the shadow of her fear of water. Now, she also wanted to talk to him. Yifeng naturally understood her thoughts. He slightly shook his head. Xuema, thank you for your kindness, but I can't go. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows. Why? Yifeng looked back at Yan Ziyuan's room. She will get married tomorrow. I will guard her for one more night. After tonight, he would silently leave. From now on, the world would be his home. He would wander the world and never return to this sad place. He would only bless her from afar and would not cause her any more trouble. Ning Xuema heard him say this and did not want to force him. She sighed and was about to say goodbye when Shinjiuli, who had been invisible, suddenly appeared and said lightly, there is something strange about this. Chapter 979. His sudden appearance startled Yifeng. He took a step back and asked, You are Mr. Han. Shinjiuli was currently wearing Han Shanyue's attire. Yifeng had seen him from afar before, so he recognized him. Shinjiuli glanced at him and grunted in response. Ning Xuema immediately grabbed his sleeve and asked, Guru, what's so strange about this? She had been talking with Yan Ziyuan for so long, but she didn't find anything strange. How did the guru find out? Shinjiuli was very satisfied with her body language, but he obviously didn't want to talk here. Let's find a place to talk. He looked at Yifeng again and said, If this is the result you want, then you can wait here for a night. Yifeng didn't know what he was trying to do, but it gave him a glimmer of hope. He took a deep breath and said, There's a tea house in the city. It's quiet and elegant. It's a good place to talk. Shinjiuli nodded slightly and said, Let's go there. Ning Xuema couldn't help but glance at Shinjiuli. The guru was indeed the guru. He managed to trick people into drinking tea with just one sentence. The three of them left quickly, without alerting anyone in the Yan residence. Inside the room, Yan Ziyuan didn't hear anything outside. After sending Ning Xuema away, she sat at the table in a daze for a moment. These days, no one mentioned anything about Yifeng to her. She just subconsciously felt that she hated him. Especially after hearing about her father, her disgust for him doubled. This time, Ning Xuema's words made her understand some things. She felt that her hatred for Yifeng didn't change much, but she didn't know why, but when she heard his name, her heart ached. Especially after Ning Xuema told her about her past life, she felt even more upset. An inexplicable bitterness surged in her chest. It made it hard for her to calm down. Her fingers once again stroked the wedding dress and phoenix coronet. Tomorrow, she would be Xian's bride. Being able to marry big brother Xian was the greatest happiness in her life. As for other people, it was better not to think about them. At the same time, inside the Gu mansion, there was a big red, 11 character, a big red lantern, and an endless stream of servants and officers. The entire Gu mansion was preparing for the wedding tomorrow. It was destined to be a sleepless night. Gu Xian sat alone in the bridal chamber. He touched the quilt on the bed, and then touched the curtains of the bed. Tomorrow, he would be able to marry her. He would finally be able to have her. He only knew the pain when he lost her. After she resolutely let go, he realized that he actually loved her and had always liked her. He thought that he had no fate with her in this life, but he never thought that there would be a day when he would see the light at the end of the tunnel. Tomorrow, she would go through the wedding ceremony with him. She would sit on the wedding bed, waiting for him to remove her veil, drink wine with him, let him take off her hairpin, hold her hair with him, and enjoy the pleasure of being intimate with him on this bed. He would be gentle with her, pamper her, love her, and make her heart return to him. "Young master, Miss Rong Yen is here," a servant outside reported. Gu Zian woke up from his daydream and slightly frowned. What is she doing here? After thinking about it, he still walked out. The wedding hall had already been decorated beautifully and magnificently. Although Gu Zian wasn't from a rich family, Mayor Yen was. He didn't want his daughter to marry in a shabby manner, so he secretly sent Gu Zian a batch of silver to make sure that the wedding ceremony was beautiful and grand. Chapter 980. Gu Zian naturally also wanted to give Yen Ziyuan the most unforgettable wedding. He initially felt that he had lost face and didn't want to accept the money sent by his future father-in-law, but Lord Yan's words made him change his mind. Ziyuan will recover in the future. At that time, although what's done can't be undone, if your wedding is too shabby, it will inevitably make her feel worse. It's better to do your best to make it grand. First, it won't be a disgrace to her. Second, when she recovers, she will think of the wedding you prepared for her today and know that you are full of feelings for her. Her heart will be a lot better. She loves you, and it will be easy for her to fall in love with you again in the future. It was these words that made Gu Zian harden his heart and accept the money from his future father-in-law. He would do everything he could to make a big deal out of it. Of course, he also wanted to save face. He didn't want to be laughed at for living off a woman, so he wrote an IOU to his father-in-law. In the future, he will have to pay back the money. Lord Yen knew that his future son-in-law was proud and arrogant, so he accepted the IOU. In his heart, he planned to prepare more dowry for his daughter, so that his daughter won't suffer when she marries him. As for Gu Zian having to take Rong Yen as a concubine, Lord Yen didn't think it was a big deal. After all, which man doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines? What's more, this Rong Yen is his adopted daughter. As long as his baby daughter becomes the legal wife, he can be relieved of one of his worries. Because the father-in-law and son-in-law reached an agreement, the wedding was exceptionally grand. From the layout of the wedding hall to the arrangement of the wedding procession, to the printing of the invitations, every process strived to be perfect and luxurious. For example, the wedding hall at the moment was decorated magnificently, comparable to a luxurious palace. At the moment, Rong Yen was standing in the wedding hall. Her eyes were filled with anger and envy. When Gu Zian came, she rushed over with grievance. "Brother Zian." Gu Zian faintly frowned and supported her. "What's wrong?" Rong Yen looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Brother Zian, in 3 days, Rong Yen also wants to have a wedding like this." Gu Zian frowned. "Nonsense. Taking a concubine was just a matter of carrying a small sedan chair over. At most, they would perform the ceremony in the side hall, and that would be giving her enough face." She still wanted the same wedding ceremony. How could this be? "Brother Zian, this is unfair to Rong Yen." Rong Yan's tears immediately fell. If my father was still alive, he would never let his daughter suffer such grievances. Gu Zian was annoyed by her crying, but he couldn't scold her. He could only coax her with a soft voice. "Rong Yen, there is no concubine in this world. People will criticize you. In fact, the wedding is just a formality. The most important thing is the husband's love for you. After you marry me, I will spoil you as much as I spoil her. I won't let you suffer too much, but, in 3 days, Rong Yen will have to kneel down and offer tea to her." "I'm not willing," it's just a kneel, that's all. Zun is a woman with a strong sense of righteousness. She won't let you suffer too much, and she won't embarrass you either. At most, you can kneel to her when you marry into the family. You don't have to do that in the future. You two are sisters, and in the future, you should live in harmony with each other in the Gu residence. Rong Yan pulled his sleeve. Brother Zian, in the future, I want to be your co-wife. I don't want to be suppressed by her. At this time, Gu Zian only wanted to coax her away. We'll talk about this later. In short, in the future, I won't let you suffer. Chapter 981. 3 days later, even if it's not the same wedding, I still want to go through the wedding ceremony with Brother Zian. Otherwise, I will be looked down upon. Rong Yan continued to raise conditions. Gu Zian pondered for a moment. Good. He and she will go through the wedding ceremony in the side hall, it's not worth anything. Just as he finished the word good, he suddenly seemed to be aware of something. He turned his head to look outside, and then his body stiffened. Yan Ziyuan was standing at the entrance, looking at them in a daze. Her face was slightly pale, and her red lips were tightly pursed. Obviously, she heard the conversation between Gu Zian and Rong Yan. Gu Zian's heart sank. Ziyuan, why are you here? He was about to walk over quickly. Rong Yan threw herself into his arms, hugging his waist. Zian Gij, I'm a little dizzy. She looked like she would fall down at any time. Gu Zian had no choice but to support her. You were fine, why are you dizzy again? He was afraid that he would neglect Yan Ziyuan, so he hurriedly asked her, Ziyuan, is there something wrong? You sit down first. Yan Ziyuan looked at them hugging each other, slightly drooping her eyes. Nothing, I just came to see. If there's nothing else, I'll go first. She strode out. Gu Zian was afraid that she would be sad, hurriedly said, Ziyuan, you wait, I have something to say to you. Yan Ziyuan stopped, but did not look back. What do you want to say? Are you angry? No. Yan Ziyuan replied with 2 words. She thought she would be angry and jealous. But no, she didn't feel jealous, she just felt a little tired. Perhaps she already knew that Rong Yan and herself would serve the same husband, so she subconsciously accepted it. She said to herself. She suddenly came here because she felt a little uncertain about her own feelings. She wanted to see him to make her mind firmer, but she didn't expect to see this scene. Was this the kind of life she wanted to live? She was jealous of this woman in the back residence. Just thinking about this kind of life made her feel vexed. Gu Zian wanted to stop her, but Rong Yan was wrapped around his body. He couldn't get away, so he could only watch her leave. Forget it. After the wedding ceremony with her tomorrow, he would coax her properly during the wedding night. After all, women were all made of water and were very easy to coax. He looked at the face beside him, and his head started to hurt. 2 women were enough to make him feel like he was in a terrible fix. How did those men with multiple wives deal with all this? With great difficulty, he managed to send Rong Yan away. He breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to go to the housekeeper to see if he had missed anything, a shadow flashed in front of him, and a person appeared out of nowhere. That person was wearing a black robe and a ferocious mask on his face, making it impossible for others to see his face. This person appeared out of thin air on a chair in the hall, lazily looking at him. His deep eyes fell on him, and with a smile that wasn't a smile, how does it feel to see 2 women fighting over you? This person's voice has obviously been specially processed. It was slightly hoarse, but it was extremely pleasant to listen to, with a taste of ecstasy. Gu Zian was a little surprised, and hurriedly saluted him. Benefactor, what brings you here? I came to see you. The person lazily said, and also to retrieve the thing that this lord and you agreed on. Gu Zian's face slightly changed, and he paused. Benefactor, forgive Xian for asking, but after Benefactor took away Xian's Guqin soul, will Xian not be able to play the Guqin anymore? The person's eyes flickered slightly. Why? Do you regret it? Chapter 982. He smiled coldly. I never force people. It's not too late for you to regret now. I don't need your Guqin soul, but I will immediately remove the curse on Yan Ziyuan. Let her really remember everything. Gu Xian's expression changed greatly. He quickly shook his head. No. I can't. Since you can't, then you have to fulfill your promise to me. The man in black pressed. Okay. Gu Xian's face was slightly pale. He didn't know what would happen if he lost his Guqin soul, but he had no way out now. He couldn't afford to lose Yan Ziyuan again, and ruin this carefully planned wedding. Don't worry. After you lose your Guqin soul, you will still be a normal man. You won't feel any pain. You can even play the Guqin for fun. The man guided patiently. It turned out that he could still play the Guqin normally. Gu Xian was finally relieved. How do I get this Guqin soul? Gu Xian looked at the man who was like the Dark Knight. Xian doesn't know how to do it. Or should I get it myself, Benefactor? The man said indifferently, it's not difficult. Just listen to my instructions. If he could get it himself without asking for the other party's permission, why would he waste so much effort? He instructed Gu Xian to sit in a position he specified. He stretched out his hands in the air and a Guqin appeared in his hands. Gu Xian only felt dizzy. The Guqin was also ink black and looked a little strange. The man placed the Guqin on Gu Xian's lap. He gently cut Gu Xian's finger with his finger. Drops of blood emerged from Gu Xian's fingertip and dripped onto the Guqin. It was strange. Gu Xian's finger was cut, but he didn't feel any pain. After his blood dripped onto the Guqin, it didn't flow. Instead, it quickly sank into the strings and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The wound on Gu Xian's finger also disappeared. Follow my instructions and play a tune. That person began to teach him the specific steps. Gu Xian was a man of his word. One command, one action. Less than an hour later, Gu Xian slowly opened his eyes. The zither on his lap was gone, and the black-robed man was nowhere to be seen. He slowly got up and moved his arms and legs. There was nothing wrong with them. It seemed that the black-clothed man did not lie to him. Although he had lost his zither soul, there was nothing strange about it. He recalled the strange zither again. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that the zither should be dark blue. That black-robed man also gave him a sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen him somewhere before, but he couldn't remember where. As he pondered, he quickly returned to his zither room. He picked up a Guqin and began to play it. It was a familiar fingering technique and a familiar melody. He heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that he still knew how to play the Guqin, and he was quite good at it. Outside the door, an old servant who was always by his side listened for a while. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. The notes that the young master played were all correct, but it seemed to have lost its soul. It seemed to be a little rigid and no longer intoxicating. In a private room of a restaurant, Ning Xuema, Shen Jiuli, and Yi Feng sat opposite each other. There were all kinds of dishes on the table. It was sumptuous. The dishes were cooked by the best chefs in the restaurant. They looked, smelled, and tasted good. Naturally, the wine was also the best. It was transparent amber in the wine cup. The wine was fragrant and intoxicating. Chapter 983. Yi Feng knew that Master Han liked tea, so he wanted to invite them to a tea house. However, the master simply said, "I'm hungry." Yifeng immediately took the hint and led them to the best restaurant in Daliang City and ordered the best dishes. Ning Xuemo felt that the Almighty was not kind. Yifeng was already so depressed, yet he still wanted to rip him off without batting an eyelid. Hungry. How could he still feel hungry when he was at the level of a master? How strange. Ning Xuemo had always thought that the Almighty was incomparably high and mighty in front of the world. He was above the common populace, and sometimes he would even save the world like a bodhisattva. However, she did not expect him to have such a wicked side. She felt that her definition of the Almighty had been refreshed again. Almighty, I thought you didn't eat the 5 grains of the mortal world anymore. Why did you order so much this time? Ning Xuemo asked him through telepathy. Shen Jiuli glanced at her. If I'm not hungry, aren't you hungry too? So, the Almighty ordered for her. Ning Xuemo was touched. She was indeed hungry, but there were too many things to do after coming here, so she did not have time to think about it. She glanced at the dishes on the table again. Indeed, 9 out of 10 dishes were her favorite. However, why was there a table full of more than 20 dishes? She would be full even if she tasted all of them. Master, where are you? Wah, I'm so tired from rushing here. Kiran's panting howl sounded in Ning Xuemo's mind. Apparently, it had just arrived. It was 4 hours later than Ning Xuemo and the rest. Ning Xuemo told it the address. After a while, Kiran barged in amidst the exclamations of the diners downstairs. It was in such a hurry that it was covered in sweat. As soon as it entered, it pounced in front of Ning Xuemo. It almost stuck out its tongue and gasped for breath. Master, I'm starving. He's too fast. I can't catch up with him. I'm starving to death. She stared at the table full of dishes and was moved to tears. Master, you're so nice. You knew that Little Apple would be hungry, so you specially ordered such a big table of dishes for Little Apple. Ning Xuemo, she couldn't help but admire the Almighty's ability to calculate. He was able to accurately calculate the time Kiran would arrive so that she, the owner, could prepare food for him in time. Kiran had expended a lot of energy this time. Naturally, it was tired and hungry. Therefore, it ate 70 to 80% of the food on the table. Naturally, Ning Xuemo was also very satisfied. Of course, she didn't forget her business. Almighty, what do you mean by strange? Shenjiuli gently swirled the wine glass in his hand. Sleep without speaking, eat without speaking. Why are you in such a hurry? Let's eat first. Ning Xuemo, Almighty, you're not purposely trying to trick Yifeng into eating a meal, are you? She looked at Yifeng. Yifeng was also very anxious. Perhaps it was because he had endured for so many years that he had cultivated an unusual calmness. Therefore, he didn't rush them. He only poured wine and served food for the two of them. Although he wasn't good with words, he still had the necessary etiquette. Ning Xuemo had attended many banquets in her life. She had seen all kinds of atmosphere, but she had never seen this kind of banquet. The 3 of them didn't talk much and just ate their own food. Shenjiuli took good care of her from beginning to end. From time to time, he would serve her food. When he saw what she liked to eat, he would teleport the plate in front of her. He would only serve Kiran after she tasted it. Yifeng had a lot on his mind. He didn't eat much and just accompanied the 2 of them. Halfway through the meal, a person downstairs said loudly, Student Gu Zian is here to visit Celestial Master Han. Chapter 984. Ning Xuemo's eyes flickered. Gu Zian was quite well informed. He had gotten the news that Han Shangyue was in Daliang City so quickly. Yifeng's expression changed slightly. He gripped his wine cup tightly and said, Master, do you want me to leave for a while? Shinjioli glanced at him and said, "You don't owe him anything. Why are you hiding from him?" Yi Feng did not say anything. Ning Xuema did not interrupt either. She crossed her arms and sat at the side. Although she had not guessed Shinjioli's motive, she could tell that he wanted to interfere in this matter. "Come in," Shinjioli said casually. Gu Ziyan walked in with large strides. When he saw Yi Feng sitting there, he was a little stunned and his expression changed slightly. A hint of guilt flashed across his eyes, but it quickly returned to normal. He bowed respectfully to Shinjioli. He had personally come to deliver the invitation to Master Han and Madame Ru to attend his wedding tomorrow. Shinjioli sat there and looked at him. He raised his wine cup and took a sip. He said casually, "I am not interested in attending other people's weddings." Gu Ziyan naturally opened his mouth and begged. Master Han was of noble status. Since he had come to Daliang City, as the son-in-law of the city lord, he had to come and deliver the invitation. Gu Ziyan did not have much confidence when he came. After all, everyone knew that Master Han was famous for being difficult to invite. Master Han could refuse, but as the host, Gu Ziyan could not refuse. Of course, it was fine if he could not invite him. If he could invite him, it would add a lot of color to his wedding. Therefore, he was very sincere when he invited the other party to join him. Just as he was about to break his lips, Han Shanyue glanced at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema was also a quick-witted person. She immediately said, "Guru, Yan Ziyuan and I have some friendship. For my sake, you should go." Shinjioli seemed to be moved. He said lightly, "It's not impossible to make a trip there." Gu Ziyan glanced at the wine jug. The wine jug flew up on its own and filled up a cup in front of Gu Ziyan. "That depends on your sincerity." Gu Ziyan was overjoyed when he heard that Ziyan was relieved. He immediately raised the wine cup in front of him and said, "Master, Ziyan is sincerely inviting the two of you. Ziyan will drink this cup as a sign of respect." "I was just about to drink it." "The two of you." Shinjioli repeated with a faint smile. Gu Ziyan was also a smart person. He immediately understood what Han Shanyue was trying to say. After a slight pause, he could only say, "It's a slip of the tongue." "The three of you, it's the three of you." Yi Feng's expression changed slightly. Personally attend the wedding of his sweetheart? He was not prepared for this yet. He was about to subconsciously refuse when Ning Xuema glanced at him. Yi Feng's heart skipped a beat. He endured it and did not speak. Shinjioli said lightly, "This is the prince of the shark men. Are you only going to say a few words of greeting?" Now that things had developed to this point, Gu Ziyan had no way out. He could only say, "So young Master Yi is the prince of the shark men." Previously, young Master Yi lowered himself to be a secret guard in front of my wife. This Gu was also negligent. "I apologize to you here." His words were like a needle hidden in silk floss. On the surface, he was apologizing, but on the inside, he was mocking Yi Feng's behavior of being a secret guard in front of Yan Ziyuan. Ning Xuema could not help but glance at Gu Ziyan. She originally thought that this person had a bit of a scholar's pride and loftiness. She did not expect him to be so experienced in the ways of the world. He did not lose out to a wily old fox in the Jianghu and had a bit of a Philistine aura. Chapter 985. Him calling Yan Ziyuan wifey in front of Yi Feng was clearly a kind of warning and also a declaration of possession. The provocation was still very strong. Ning Xuema could not stand it and was just about to speak when Shinjioli put a hand on her shoulder and said coolly, "This seat wants to eat that stir-fried heaven crystal fish." Ning Xuema brought that plate of fish over and placed it in front of him. Only after serving did she come back to her senses. Great God had always been putting food in her bowl. Why did he suddenly let her serve food for him? With this distraction, she forgot about standing up for Yifeng. Yifeng over there said coolly, for her, I won't feel aggrieved no matter what I do. Gu Zian choked and then said with a smile, young master Ye's love and care for wifey is touching. But wifey having me, this husband, to dote on her in the future is enough. Young master Yi should also go and find his own happiness. Yifeng lowered his eyes slightly and said coolly, this Yi only hopes that she can obtain happiness. As for other things, there's no need to trouble child Gu to worry. A brief conversation, the two people's styles were immediately superior. Two people both loved the same woman. One was possessing her by hook or by crook, while the other was fulfilling the other party's happiness. Ning Xuema could not resist shooting a glance at Yifeng. She did not misjudge Yifeng. This person was a true gentleman who was open and aboveboard. Gu Zian sucked in a breath. This Gu will give her happiness. Yifeng raised his wine cup and said coolly, you better remember this sentence of yours. Otherwise, this Yi will be the first to not let you off. His words were full of vigor. But Gu Zian let out a sigh in relief after hearing it. Yifeng saying this meant that he was withdrawing. He made this request in the capacity of Yan Ziyuan's maiden family. Gu Zian also finally set his mind at ease and said with a smile, I definitely won't disappoint Brother Yi. In the future, when we, husband and wife, are in harmony, we will have to invite Brother Yi again. Gu Zian left the two invitations behind and left. He walked away triumphantly. Being able to invite Gu Zian as a guest at his wedding would definitely spread throughout the entire continent in the future. Then, Gu Zian's fame would also rise, and his title as the Zither Saint would become even more resounding and bright. Naturally, he would not be able to escape the glory, splendor, and wealth that he deserved. A vile character intoxicated by success. The little Qilin commented after Gu Zian left. Ning Xuema frowned slightly. She felt that Gu Zian seemed to have changed. Originally, he had a pure and noble aura about him, but now that they met again, that aura had disappeared without a trace. Instead, it was filled with the aura of a merchant. If Yan Ziyuan really married him, would she really be happy? Ning Xuema deeply doubted this point. She looked at Yifeng and then thought about Gu Zian. She could not help but sigh. Was Yan Ziyuan that girl blind? She held a fish-eye in her arms like a treasure, but gave up a real pearl. Yifeng, are you really going to give up? Ning Xuema felt unreconciled for Yifeng. If Yifeng had lost to a super outstanding person, then it would have been fine. But to lose to such a person, even she felt aggrieved for him. Yifeng slightly clenched his fists. He also did not want to give up. He also felt that it was not worth it for Yan Ziyuan. But Yan Ziyuan liked that man. What could he do? He did not want to force her to do anything. He lowered his eyes and did not say anything. Who you like is not a problem of compatibility. Shinjiuli suddenly said. His words were the truth. After saying this, he faintly glanced at Ning Xuema. Ning Xuema originally felt that his words were very reasonable, but when she saw him looking at her, she immediately became suspicious. Chapter 986. Did he think that the two of them were not compatible? TSK, even if their identities were a little unsuitable, but wasn't she improving at a rapid pace? Was there anyone else in the world who improved as fast as her? She had potential, she was a dark horse. If she cultivated for a few thousand years, she might even be more powerful than him. She turned her head and looked at him with a faint smile. Even if you like him, you can give up if you don't think we're compatible. Humph, did he think she cared? Her luck with men was extraordinarily good. You can't give up, it's best if you like him. Shinjiuli poured wine for her. Be good, try this, it suits your taste. He then peeled a crab and placed it on her plate. Yifeng, the cold and aloof Master Han Shanhua, was actually serving a girl like this, and it was so smooth that it didn't seem out of place at all. Master Han Shanhua's possessive attitude towards Ning Xuemo could be seen even by a blind person. Looking at Ning Xuemo's attitude, it was obvious that she also liked this master. This feeling of mutual affection was so good. He actually wanted to serve someone like this, and he also wanted to put that person in his hands and dote on her, but it was a pity that that person was still ruthless towards him. He could only let go and fulfill her wish. Guru, you said that there was something strange about this matter. What was strange about it? Can you tell me now? Ning Xuemo asked after eating and drinking to her heart's content. Yan Ziyuan was cursed by someone. Shinjiuli said slowly, but it had an earth-shattering effect. Yifeng's hand trembled, and he suddenly looked up. She was cursed. What kind of curse? Ning Xuemo also raised her eyebrows in surprise. She was a doctor and was good at treating difficult and complicated diseases, but she was a layman when it came to curses. What kind of curse? The twin life curse. Shinjiuli said lightly, the person under this curse will be dead set on liking the person under the curse, regardless of any gains or losses. Even if the person deeply hated that person, once under the curse, they will still like that person. If the curse is not broken, their liking will not change. You're saying that Yan Ziyuan was under Gu Ziyan's curse. He actually knows this kind of mysterious martial arts. Ning Xuemo's eyebrows raised even higher. Yifeng shook his head. I've observed Gu Ziyan for 3 years, so I'm very clear about his background. His psychokinesis is not bad, and his talent in the art of music is extremely high, but the rest is sloppy and ordinary. He shouldn't have such mysterious and profound martial arts. Who said that Gu Ziyan was the one who cast the curse? He doesn't have that ability. To practice this technique, one needs to be at least at the 9th level of the earth rank. Gu Ziyan is only at the 6th level of the human rank. Naturally, it wasn't him who did it. Then someone is helping him. Ning Xuemo immediately thought of the key question. That's right. The method of using this curse is quite complicated. The real caster will pass this curse to Gu Ziyan, and then transfer the power to him behind his back, allowing him to quickly cast the curse on Yan Ziyuan. Once the curse succeeds, the real caster will withdraw the power. So, the reason why Ziyuan is so dead set on Gu Ziyan is because of this curse. Yan Ziyuan hasn't been under this curse for a long time. It should be less than 20 days. Shinjiuli's eyes were like torches as he mentioned the date. His gaze fell on Yifeng. As for before, it's because of her true feelings, her true liking. She also liked Gu Ziyan before. Ning Xuemo and Yifeng both knew this. Yifeng smiled bitterly. I don't quite understand. Ziyuan originally liked him. Isn't it unnecessary for him to use this curse? Chapter 987. Shinjiuli raised his hand and took a sip of tea. We can only find out after the curse is broken. Ning Xuemo clapped her hands and said, maybe she used to like Gu Ziyan, but later realized that he was actually a scumbag and didn't like him anymore. Sigh, that doesn't seem to be entirely right. I heard that Yan Ziyuan tried her best to save Yifeng. How could she immediately put Yifeng's matter aside after being hit by this curse and happily get married? Wouldn't she be puzzled by her previous actions of trying so hard to save him? Part of her memory seems to have been erased, Shinjiuli said again. I'm afraid she doesn't remember that she was in a hurry to save Yifeng. Ning Xuemo was surprised. Memories can be erased. Who has such a perverted ability? Shinjiuli was speechless. He didn't say anything, but he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. It seemed that he did have such a perverted ability, and he had used it on her several times. Fortunately, Ning Xuemo's attention quickly shifted. It seems that Ziyuan might have fallen in love with someone else, so Gu Ziyan had no choice but to use such a wicked method. Is there a way to break this curse? Shenjiuli said, this curse won't last for too long, at most half a year. After half a year, the curse will be broken. Ning Xuema was speechless. After half a year, it will be too late. By then, Ziyuan might even have a baby. What's done can't be undone. No matter how much she hates Gu Ziyan, there's nothing she can do. She can only be depressed for the rest of her life. Yifeng's eyes were burning. She died of depression in her previous life, so she can't do the same in this life. Shenjiuli looked at him. What are you going to do? I'm going to ruin their wedding. Yifeng said firmly. If you ruin this wedding, she might hate you even more. Moreover, she might still like Gu Ziyan after the curse was lifted half a year later. What will you do then? I don't want her to regret it for the rest of her life. If she wants to hate me, let her hate me. If she still likes that man after the curse is broken, I will think of a way to help her. In this life, I only hope that she won't have any more regrets. Yifeng really loved Yan Ziyuan. He had already given up everything for her. Ning Xuema was also moved by his feelings. She looked at Shenjiuli and asked, Great God, is there no way to break the curse for Yan Ziyuan in advance? Shenjiuli said indifferently, yes, but it's a little complicated and not easy to do. Tell me about it. You need 3 flowers of ice flame, and these flowers must be immediately picked and mixed with the blood of the caster. Only then will it be effective. Shenjiuli explained. Ning Xuema frowned slightly. She already understood the structure of this world. She knew that the flowers of ice flame grew on the ice field thousands of miles away from here. And it was extremely rare. It was not easy to find. Although the ice field was called an ice field, it was actually composed of floating ice like the North Pole. It was not a real land and was surrounded by the sea. Usually, no one would venture there. No ships passed by there. It was a real no man's land. Yifeng was a shark man after all. If he went there alone, the sea would not be a problem for him. However, the condition of taking the flower while it was fresh and mixed with the blood of the caster required him to bring Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan with him. Would they be willing to go there obediently? It was impossible to think about it. Even if Yan Ziyuan trusted Ning Xuema more, if Ning Xuema told her the truth, she might follow to the ice field to ask for the truth. But what about Gu Ziyan? He would definitely not agree to it. He might even try to stop Yan Ziyuan from going there. Chapter 988. Yifeng obviously also considered this point and frowned. Gu Ziyan's blood also needs to be fresh. Shenjiuli nodded, yes, we must immediately collect blood from a living person after finding the flower of ice flame and feed it to Yan Ziyuan. Only then can the curse be immediately lifted. Yifeng clenched his fist and said, then I'll just kidnap Gu Ziyan. His kung fu was much better than Gu Ziyan's. It would be easy for him to kidnap that person. Why be so rough? Ning Xuema suddenly smiled. If you kidnap the groom at the wedding, Ziyuan will hate you even more. It's better to let them go voluntarily. Voluntarily? How is that possible? Yifeng raised his eyebrows. Shenjiuli looked at her with his chin in his hand. Did you think of a way? Ning Xuema smiled slightly. I think we can poison Gu Ziyan and say that only the flower of ice flame can cure it. Also, it must be eaten while it is fresh. I guarantee that Gu Ziyan will go. Since Gu Ziyan will go, Ziyuan will be worried about him and will naturally follow him. Won't this solve the problem? This was indeed a good idea without shedding a drop of blood. Shenjiuli raised his hand and poured a cup of tea for her. I don't know what kind of poison you want to give him. How? This. I have to find a slow-acting one that doesn't cause too much harm to the human body and looks scary. As for how to do it, we can only act according to the circumstances tomorrow. Shinjoli shook his head. No, if you suddenly poison him tomorrow, what if he can't act up at that time and completes the wedding ceremony? At that time, what's done can't be undone. Besides, if you are present and he is poisoned, he may not believe you. Or if he believes you, he is afraid of long delays and insists on finding the medicine after the wedding ceremony. What should he do? Ning Xuema paused for a moment. She felt that Shinjoli was right. She pondered for a moment and stood up. That's easy. I'll go and poison him now. He definitely won't be able to perform the wedding ceremony. Shinjoli grabbed her. What's the hurry? You don't have to do it. Ning Xuema was enlightened. Could it be that you have already thought of this step and poisoned him just now? Shinjoli didn't answer, but stood up lightly. It's late, it's time to rest. He took Ning Xuema's hand and walked downstairs. Yi Feng and Yan Ziyuan were not fated. Yan Ziyuan's fate was to marry Gu Ziyan, and Gu Ziyan would become rich. After the age of 30, he would violate his oath and take in countless concubines, while Yan Ziyuan would die of depression. This was the original fate of Yi Feng and Yan Ziyuan. What they were doing now was going against the heavens and changing their fate. The heavens were unpredictable, and changing fate would bring misfortune to those who participated, especially those who participated. Therefore, Shinjoli didn't want Ning Xuema to really intervene in this matter, lest she be more unlucky. If the heavens wanted to take revenge, they could take revenge on him. Thank you very much, Master. Yi Feng fell to his knees behind him. You don't have to thank me. If you want to thank someone, thank your friend Xuema. Shinjoli left with Ning Xuema without looking back. The next night, the streets of Daliang City were in an uproar again. The wedding that everyone in Daliang had been looking forward to was all talk and no action. In the morning, the wedding was still bustling with noise and excitement. Whether it was the wedding guards or the bride's dowry that stretched for miles, it was an eye-opener for everyone in the city. However, no one expected the groom, Gu Ziyan, to suddenly fall ill and faint in the wedding hall before the bride even arrived at the Gu mansion. Chapter 989. At that time, after the chaos, all the doctors in the city were invited to the Gu mansion, but no one could diagnose Gu Ziyan's illness. Just when everyone was anxious and didn't know what to do, Master Han Shanhua arrived with the recently famous miracle Dr. Ning Xuema. This Miss Ning was indeed worthy of her title as a divine doctor. She managed to wake Gu Ziyan up in just a few moments, but Gu Ziyan was still so weak that he could barely stand. Ning Xuema told him that if he wanted to fully recover, he had to personally go to the ice fields to pick the ice flame flower and mix it with fresh sharkman's tears. Otherwise, he would be completely paralyzed in half a month and could only struggle on the sickbed for the rest of his life. As for Master Han, his words were firm. If the wedding continued, it would be detrimental to the groom and his life would be in danger. Unless the date was changed. No one doubted Master Han's words. City Lord Yen also didn't want his daughter to become a widow right after getting married, so he begged Master Han to find another auspicious date. Master Han wasn't easy to beg. If it wasn't for Ning Xuema's face, he wouldn't have said what he said just now. The more he said, the more City Lord Yen believed him. In the end, he almost knelt down and begged on behalf of his daughter. Only then did Master Han give him face and tell him a date. And that date was 3 months later. Gu Ziyan and City Lord Yen both knew that Yan Ziyuan would only return to normal after half a year, so 3 months wasn't too late. Nothing would change. So City Lord Yen decided on the spot to postpone the wedding to the date 3 months later. Just like that, the bustling wedding came to an end, and it became the talk of the town. And Ning Xuema's reputation as a miracle doctor became even more famous. Because Gu Xian's illness couldn't be delayed, City Lord Yan immediately arranged for a group of people to go to the ice fields. Although Gu Xian could walk normally, he had lost all of his psychokinesis, so he only had the ability of an ordinary person. He needed someone to take care of him, so Yan Ziyuan naturally volunteered to stay by his side. When Rong Yan heard about this, in order to show her virtuousness and love for Gu Xian, she naturally wanted to follow. But she was rejected by Gu Xian without any hesitation. Rong Yan's martial arts skills were just for show. If she went, not only would she be of no help, she would also be a hindrance, so he had to ask someone to take care of her. Rong Yan's heart was naturally unwilling. She cried in front of Gu Xian, as if they were parting forever. This made Gu Xian extremely annoyed, and from then on, he didn't like her. It was already late in the winter. Especially flying towards the coldest northwest direction, the temperature was getting colder and colder. Naturally, the wind was also extremely cold. Ning Xuema once again sat on Kiran's back, and Shinjiuli sat behind her. This time, he didn't set up a barrier to resist the wind, so Ning Xuema once again deeply felt the coldness of the winter. She closed her eyes slightly, and circulated the psychokinesis of fire around her body to expel the biting cold. Shinjiuli thought that once she felt the cold, she would automatically shrink into his arms, but he didn't expect that she would take the opportunity to practice. It had to be said that this was a good time to practice the psychokinesis of fire. Under the stimulation of the cold wind, Ning Xuema's practice speed was twice as fast as normal practice. Shinjiuli looked at her straight back, and his eyes flashed with a touch of relief. She was really a hard-working child. Even without his urging, she didn't forget to practice at all times. Kiran also flew leisurely. This time, it didn't have to rush, so it flew leisurely much faster than the big bird behind it. Chapter 990. In order to save his future son-in-law, as well as to make his daughter more comfortable, City Lord Yan had given up the carriage that the emperor had given him. Although City Lord Yan was only a city lord, because Daliang City was a frontier fortress, the emperor valued it greatly. In order to win him over, Lu Hinti had once given him a carriage that was even bigger than the one that Ji Yunhuang had taken when he left the Sun-Moon sect. 3 people could easily sit in it. The carriage was carried by a huge red-crowned crane, which flew quickly and steadily. Of course, this red-crowned crane's speed was still far from Kiran's. It could fly about 3,000 miles a day. With its speed, it would take at least 4 days to reach the ice plains. Gu Xian, Yan Ziyuan, and Yi Feng were now sitting together in the carriage. The atmosphere in the carriage was slightly strange. Gu Xian and Yan Ziyuan sat side by side, and the two of them whispered a few words from time to time. They looked quite harmonious. Yi Feng, on the other hand, sat opposite them. His eyes were slightly closed the entire time, and he didn't say a word. For some reason, Yan Ziyuan felt an inexplicable anger in her heart whenever she saw Yi Feng. She was very unwilling to be in the same carriage as him. She liked Gu Xian very much now, so she naturally cherished the opportunity to be in the same carriage as him. However, Yi Feng was like a big third wheel, which made her feel uncomfortable being close to Gu Xian. She wanted nothing more than to find an excuse to kick Yi Feng out. However, her fiancé, Gu Xian, required a drop of Yi Feng's sharkman's blood every 2 hours to maintain his normal activities. Therefore, although she was very disgusted with Yi Feng sitting in the carriage, she couldn't kick him out. However, she felt that the heavens were treating her well for being able to sit next to her sweetheart like this without Rong Yan coming out to disturb them. She was, after all, an innocent and unaffected young girl. As long as she stayed by her sweetheart's side and whispered to him, she would feel satisfied. She didn't care whether they were intimate or not. Yen Ziyuan felt that her emotions were a little strange. She inexplicably hated Yi Feng and didn't want to see him. However, when she was talking intimately with Gu Ziyan, she saw Yi Feng sitting quietly with his eyes lowered. She felt even more angry and even a little sad. These emotions were intertwined, and even she couldn't tell what it was like. She would glance at him once in a while, and then look away with hatred. Compared to her, Gu Ziyan was more miserable. His love rival was sitting right in front of him, so naturally, he wanted to show the other party that he owned Yen Ziyuan. So, intentionally or unintentionally, he would make some physical contact with Yen Ziyuan. Sometimes, he would hug her waist, put his arm around her shoulders, or even hold her hand. His actions should have a certain visual impact on Yi Feng and make him feel sad. However, Yi Feng's forbearance was too good. No matter what Gu Ziyan did, Yi Feng always sat there expressionlessly. His handsome face didn't show any emotion. This made Gu Ziyan feel very unaccomplished. Gu Ziyan's forbearance was usually very good, but this time, he didn't know if it was because he had lost his psychokinesis and because his sweetheart was sitting next to him, but he couldn't help but feel aroused when he made these physical contact with Yen Ziyuan. Since arousal would cause changes to the body, Yen Ziyuan was an unromantic young girl. She accidentally saw his robe gradually rising and thought that his illness was acting up again, so she asked him about it with concern. Gu Ziyan wasn't a thin-skinned person, but when his love rival was sitting right in front of him, this kind of situation made him feel very embarrassed. In shock, the part of his robe that was raised went back down. Chapter 991. Men were like that. The more secretive and untouchable a place was, the easier it was for them to get aroused. Even though he knew that he shouldn't do this, his second brother still couldn't help but raise his head again and again. Then, he held it back again and again. After a few times, he couldn't take it anymore. He was afraid that he would be stimulated to the point that he couldn't be a real man in the future. Therefore, he didn't dare to be too intimate with Yen Ziyuan anymore and became a gentleman. He talked to Yen Ziyuan politely and didn't even dare to hold her hand anymore. As for Yi Feng, although his eyes were closed, he could still hear every movement of the two people in front of him clearly. When he was sitting in the carriage, he was prepared to face their intimacy. Although he was calm on the surface, what about his heart? He smiled bitterly in his heart. It turned out that no matter how prepared he was, his heart would still hurt when he saw his sweetheart being intimate with another man. On Kiran's back, as the weather became colder, Shinjioli set up a wizardry barrier to cover himself and Ning Xuemo. As soon as he finished setting up the wizardry barrier, Ning Xuemo, who had been sitting there, fell into his arms unceremoniously. "I'm so tired." Shinjioli hugged the beauty in his arms and was in a good mood. He felt her pulse and felt that her fire psychokinesis had increased a little. She was indeed a genius. She was more talented than any of his disciples. He wasn't wrong about this disciple. Of course, his taste in choosing a wife was even better. Only she was worthy to stay by his side and laugh with him. With her by his side, he never felt bored again. He lowered his head and planted a kiss on her forehead, right on top of her cinnabar mole. Ning Xuemo felt an itch between her eyebrows from his kiss. She smiled and wanted to dodge, but her waist was held tightly by him. "If you're tired, take a nap. I'll wake you up when we arrive." Shinjioli patted her pretty face. Ning Xuemo yawned. She was really sleepy, but she still had a question. "Guru, why did you ask Yi Feng to feed Gu Ziyan a drop of blood every 2 hours? Did Gu Ziyan really need his blood to function normally?" Shinjioli said indifferently, "Otherwise, how could Yi Feng be in the same carriage as them?" "So you want to kick Yi Feng into their carriage? But isn't it a little pitiful for Yi Feng? He has to watch those two get intimate." Ning Xuemo could imagine the scene inside even if she used her toes to think. She felt a little sad for Yifeng. With Yifeng there, they won't go too far. I'm doing this to protect your friend's innocence. Ning Xuema was speechless. That's true. If those two were allowed to stay in the same carriage, with Gu Xian's temperament, he might take the opportunity to get Yan Ziyuan. What's done can't be undone. So before everything was clear, it was better for Yifeng to stay there. Chapter 992. When she was in the modern era, she had heard the fortune-tellers say that if a peerless master in this field changed someone's fate, he or she would be in trouble. Therefore, in the spiritual realm, changing someone's fate was a big taboo. No one was willing to take this risk. Shinjioli ruffled her hair and replied, "You're overthinking it. Let's sleep." The little girl knew how to think for him. Not bad. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. He had lived for so long, but he had never really cared about anyone or anything. It was rare for him to care about someone so much. Naturally, he was willing to do something for her. Besides, it was not like he had never done this kind of thing before. When he was bored and in a good mood, he had done a few things to change someone's fate. Indeed, he would be punished by the heavenly Tao. However, those punishments were nothing to him. He could deal with them easily. Because this matter was not very urgent, and Gu Xian and Yan Ziyuan's physiques were not very good now, they would usually find an inn to rest after flying for a day. Gu Xian originally wanted to share a room with Yan Ziyuan, but Ning Xuema easily broke his fantasy with one sentence. "Ziyuan, you and child Gu are not married yet. I will share a room with you." Yan Ziyuan still did not understand the matters between men and women. She was still worried about Gu Xian. Xian's body is weak. He needs someone to take care of him. It's just a nap. He's just a little weak. It's not like he can't take care of himself. Why would he need someone to take care of him? Besides, child Gu is a famous gentleman. If you two live together without marriage, people will criticize you. Don't you think so, child Gu? Ning Xuema's words completely cut off Gu Xian's thoughts. He could only cough and agree with Ning Xuema. Very well. Ziyuan, you're tired too. You and Madame Ning should rest early. Thus, the two women shared a room, while the other three men each had a guest room, sleeping separately. Ning Xuema was indeed tired. Not long after she lay on the bed, she fell asleep. She had another night of messy dreams. When she woke up the next day, she was pleasantly surprised to find that she actually remembered some of her dreams. Of course, she only remembered a few vague bits and pieces. For example, she vaguely remembered that in her dream, a fox demon had willingly agreed to be the mate of a man in white who had a very high status. However, because she had never done this kind of rough work before, she appeared clumsy. Not only did the white-clothed man not enjoy her service, he also had to frequently serve her. Because the man in white was a perfectionist, he couldn't bear to see the people around him with disheveled clothes or messy hair. So he often helped her tie up her hair and dressed her up beautifully. He also couldn't bear to see her spoil his fish. She clearly loved to eat fish. Every time he cooked, she would watch from the side. Originally, the white-clothed man cooked the fish for himself. Later on, he couldn't bear to see her greedy look, so he simply cooked for her and won a few praises from her. Of course, the white-clothed man didn't buy her praises. He would use his poisonous tongue to mock her, making the little fox demon choke on her words. The white-clothed man's cooking seemed to be a hobby that came occasionally. He didn't cook often. However, the little fox demon was a picky eater. She liked the fish he cooked and often pestered him to cook for her. Perhaps it was because the fish he cooked had people who liked it, which made the white-clothed man feel a sense of accomplishment. So when the little fox pestered him, he would cook for her a few times. The result was that she only ate the food he cooked. She couldn't eat other people's food. Chapter 993. When Ning Xuema woke up, she hugged her knees and thought about it for a while. Then she let out a long sigh of relief. She could finally remember a little bit of the dream. Although it was only a few fragments and she still couldn't remember the faces and identities of the people in the dream, it was still an improvement compared to before. She turned her head and found that the moonlight flute had come out of the storage bag on its own. It was releasing a soft glow next to her pillow. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it because of this flute that she could remember a little bit of the dream? It also had the ability to cure her only strange illness. Also, how did it manage to sneak out? Could it be that this treasure had a spirit? It came out of its own accord to help her cure her strange illness. She sat on the bed and looked at the flute over and over again for a while, but she couldn't find anything special about it. Because they had to leave early the next morning, Ning Xuema didn't study the flute for long before putting it away and putting it aside. The further they flew in that direction, the colder the weather became. Especially above the clouds, the temperature was almost -20 degrees. It was true that a drop of water would turn into ice. Although cultivating in this kind of weather was hard, this kind of strong stimulation allowed Ning Xuema's cultivation to grow even faster. According to Shinjuli's plan, he would let her cultivate freely for 2 hours and then set up an enchantment for her to rest. But Ning Xuema wasn't willing. She would cultivate for 4 hours and then rest for an hour in the enchantment. After every cultivation session, her little face would be flushed red from the wind and her hands and feet would be cold like popsicles. But her entire body was excited and her eyes were bright like stars. Shinjuli was also worried that she would go astray if she was too eager to succeed in her cultivation. Hence, he would massage her for an hour after she finished her cultivation. Firstly, it was to check on her qi engine. Secondly, it was to adjust her qi that had gone astray in her body. In the end, Ning Xuema got used to his massage. Every time she finished practicing, she would simply fall into his arms and enjoy his massage for a few minutes like a lazy cat, chatting with him. Her fire psychokinesis grew very quickly and was already close to Earth rank level 3. According to Shinjuli's calculations, by the time they reached the ice field, her fire psychokinesis would have a breakthrough and enter Earth rank level 3. He could now practice some rather advanced fire element martial arts. Flying long distances in the air was originally a very boring thing, but the two of them didn't feel bored at all. Shinjuli also took the opportunity to teach her some corresponding spells when he was resting and massaging her. She was also a smart girl. She was able to learn a lot of spells and mnemonics very quickly. This made Shinjuli worry a lot less. As the two of them interacted like this, their feelings for each other naturally deepened. Ning Xuema no longer had any gap with him. When she lay in his arms, she didn't feel any psychological pressure at all. Even when he lowered his head to kiss her, she would hug his neck and respond to him. Of course, because they were on Kiran's back, the two of them didn't kiss too much. Although Kiran's head was facing forward and couldn't see the scenery on its back, it could still hear after all. Furthermore, with the great deity on its back, the little Qilin also reaped many benefits. Whenever Ning Xuema was practicing, the great deity would give the little Qilin some pointers, allowing the little Qilin to benefit greatly along the way. This group of people traveled during the day and stayed at the inn to rest at night. Ning Xuema still had dreams. Sometimes she could remember a little of the dream, and sometimes she couldn't remember anything at all. She didn't take it to heart. Chapter 994. The only thing that made her feel a little strange was that the person in her dreams had always been the little fox girl. She dreamt of her life in the valley with a man in white. Those fragments were very fragmented, but also very heartwarming. When Ning Xuemo woke up, she felt as comfortable as if she had read a heartwarming novel, and every time she woke up from her dreams, she would find the moonlight flute by her pillow. Later on, she simply took the initiative to put the flute by her pillow when she slept, so as to avoid the trouble of it wandering out by itself. The further north they went, the colder it became, and gradually, there were no signs of human habitation. Especially in the last 2 days, the group flew over the ice sea, and below them were large pieces of floating ice. Naturally, there was no place like an inn to rest. Kirin was fine. It was a mythical beast, so it had strong endurance and endurance. It could fly for 2 days and 2 nights without any problem. But the strange red-crowned crane carrying Yi Feng and the other 2 couldn't do the same. It had to rest after flying for 3 to 4 hours, and it also needed to eat to replenish its strength. So later on, when the group rested, they would find a large piece of floating ice to rest. The environment here was really like the Arctic Ocean in Ning Xuemo's time. The floating ice on the sea was bigger than the previous one. The small ones were like boulders, while the big ones were as big as an island. There was no problem for a few people and 2 beasts to rest on. The only problem was the cold. Ning Xuemo was still fine. She had trained for a long time while flying in the cold wind. Her body's strength had increased by a large margin, so her resistance to the cold was not ordinary. Therefore, when she rested on the ice floe, she didn't feel particularly cold. It wasn't hard to endure. Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan couldn't do it. Gu Ziyan didn't have much psychokinesis left, and Yan Ziyuan's psychokinesis was only about human rank level 4. In this extreme cold, although the 2 of them were wrapped in thick fur robes, they still felt terribly cold. Gu Ziyan tried his best to endure, suppressing the desire to shiver. Although Yi Feng was a shark man who lived in the sea, the shark man lived in the warm Southeast Ocean. He also couldn't stand the extreme cold in the north. Fortunately, he had strong endurance and ability, so he could still walk in this extreme cold as if nothing had happened. He could also occasionally take care of the 2 people who were shivering together. But the 2 people didn't appreciate it, and didn't want to accept his care. So Yi Feng could only dejectedly leave. On this day, the group rested on a floating ice island. Icicles were everywhere on the island, and each one was like a deep blue crystal. It was quite a spectacular sight. Because they were close to the ice field and it was the polar night, the sky was full of stars. Sometimes, the aurora borealis flashed in the far north. The scenery was beautiful that couldn't be seen in the central plains. When Ning Xuemo was in the modern era, she had traveled all over the world, but she had never been to the North Pole or the South Pole. She didn't expect that after coming to this era, she would have the opportunity to visit a place similar to the North Pole. She felt that this trip was worth it, and was in the mood to enjoy the beautiful scenery. Every time they rested, Shinjiuli would pull her to the other side to rest. He didn't sit with Yan Ziyuan and the others. The Almighty's storage space was always rich. Every time they rested, he would give her some hot food to replenish her energy. Kirin felt that it had worked hard and deserved a share of the food. But it didn't expect that as soon as it expressed its opinion, it would be kicked into the sea by the Almighty, who made it go catch fish in the sea to eat. Although Kirin was resentful, it didn't dare to say anything in the face of the powerful Almighty. It could only go catch fish in the sea by itself. Chapter 995. Although Kirin was an aquatic mythical beast, it had no experience living in the ocean. When it first started catching fish, it didn't know what kind of fish it could catch and what it couldn't. It was also curious. When it saw that the electric ray looked strange, it excitedly tried to catch it. However, it was electrocuted and its scales almost exploded. It even caught a poisonous fish. Luckily, Ning Xuemo reminded it in time, so it didn't bite it. Otherwise, it would have been poisoned. After a few times, Kirin gained a lot of experience. When it caught fish again, it could catch fish that suited its taste. It especially loved eating sharks. This kind of overlord of the sea could only wait to die when it met Kirin. After it became a Kirin, its appetite was not small. In addition, it consumed a lot of energy from the long-distance flight, so its appetite was especially big. It could eat an entire shark in one meal. The sea was rich in seafood. Not only could it catch itself to eat, but it could also catch a few big fish for the red-crowned crane and throw them in front of it as if it was doing a favor, so that it could fill its stomach. Kirin could quickly adapt to the climate here, but the red-crowned crane obviously couldn't. Every time it stopped, it shivered so much that its feathers were almost shaken off. Yan Ziyuan and Lin Yiqian naturally brought a lot of dry food, but they were all frozen and hard. It was very difficult to chew on them. Ning Xuemo wanted to share her steaming hot food with them, but Shinjiuli stopped her and said lightly, "You can't give it to them." Ning Xuemo didn't understand. She looked at the Almighty, but the Almighty didn't intend to explain to her. She wasn't that obedient. Without saying anything, she strode over and wanted to share some of her steaming hot buns with them. She didn't expect that when she walked in front of them, the buns had turned into frozen buns. She tried to use her fire psychokinesis to heat them up, but she didn't know why it was in vain. The buns were still as hard as rocks. She had no choice but to walk back and look at the Almighty. "What spell did you use on the food?" Shinjiuli sat there leisurely and said, "It's a spell that can only be used on you." "All right, Almighty, you're a pervert." On the other side, Yan Ziyuan was wrapped in 2 layers of fur, but she was still extremely cold. Gu Ziyan was also wrapped in a thick cotton coat. He hugged Yan Ziyuan in his arms, and the two of them snuggled against each other for warmth. Yi Feng was still dressed in a black robe. After sitting for a while, he raised his head and glanced at the 2 people cuddling together. Yan Ziyuan's little face was pale from the cold. Her little mouth was also a little blue, and her body was trembling slightly. It was obviously very difficult to endure. Yi Feng's fingers tightened slightly in his sleeves. He really wanted to hold her in his arms and use Sharkman's original willpower to warm her. However, the hug she longed for was not him. Along the way, she was probably trying to avoid arousing suspicion. She almost didn't talk to him. She would rather stay beside Gu Ziyan and freeze like a cold signal bird than accept his care. As for Gu Ziyan, the only thing Gu Ziyan could do was to hold her in his arms. Yi Feng stood up and looked around. Suddenly, he saw that there seemed to be a white dot moving on a piece of floating ice far away. He was Sharkman, and his eyesight was very good. After a while, he saw what the white dot was, a big white bear. Although bear meat wasn't delicious, it was hot. Roasting it would help to resist the cold. More importantly, this kind of bear lived in this kind of place, so the bear's skin must be very warm. The floating ice where the bear lived was quite far from here. If he wanted to hunt the bear, he would have to swim across a cold sea. Chapter 996. His body was adapted to the warm sea water in the south. If he jumped into the cold sea water, it would take a lot of courage to swim there. His scales might be completely frostbitten. He looked at Yan Ziyuan again and made up his mind. He didn't care anymore. If he didn't take action now, Yan Ziyuan might get sick from the cold. He silently walked to the shore and leaped into the air. He transformed into his true form of a merman in the air and jumped into the dark and cold seawater. The sound of him falling into the water startled Yan Ziyuan. She looked up and saw Yi Feng's dark blue fishtail in the sea. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but she felt that this scene was a little familiar. something seemed to flash in her mind, but when she wanted to grab it, it disappeared without a trace. What's wrong? Gu Ziyan noticed that her body stiffened for a moment and asked with concern. Why did he jump into the sea? Yan Ziyuan asked. She was obviously surprised. Gu Ziyan also looked into the water and answered casually, he is Sharkman. He should recover faster in the sea. Is that so? Yan Ziyuan's eyes flashed with uncertainty. She felt that it wasn't so simple, but she trusted Gu Ziyan very much. Since he said so, it should be true. A cold wind blew. She couldn't help but shrink her body and cursed, why is this damn place so cold? Gu Ziyan hugged her even tighter, bear with it. It will be fine when we find the ice flame flower, okay? Yan Ziyuan nodded. Although she was nestled in Gu Ziyan's arms, his body was as cold as ice, so it didn't work. Some of the heat on her body was sucked away by him. Ziyuan, I made you suffer this time. Gu Ziyan put his face on her neck and sighed. His face was cold. Yan Ziyuan couldn't help but shiver. She shook her head and didn't care, you are my future husband. I should be good to you. Ziyuan, I will not let you down in this life. Gu Ziyan promised her. Yan Ziyuan nodded. She wanted to say something but stopped. After a while, she finally asked the question that had been stuck in her heart, Ziyan, you love me, right? Of course. Ziyuan, I love you more than life. What about Rongyan? Do you love her? Gu Ziyan was startled. He looked deeply at Yan Ziyuan, why do you ask? Yan Ziyuan glanced at Ning Xuema's direction and sighed, someone once told me that if you truly love someone, you would want to be with them for the rest of your life. You wouldn't be able to tolerate even half a grain of sand in your eyes. You won't allow a third party to come in. Gu Ziyan disagreed, childish words. Ziyuan, forgive me for saying something disrespectful, but didn't your father also have a wife and concubines? How many men in this world will only marry one woman? Yan Ziyuan's face changed slightly. Her mother loved her father very much. It was because her father married Rongyan's mother that she died of anger, now she seemed to be following in her mother's footsteps. Was she destined to be unable to get rid of the shadow of Rongyan and her mother? Rongyan's beautiful face flashed in her mind. She felt a little suffocated in her heart. She couldn't help but push Gu Ziyan's face to the side, slightly leaving his embrace. Gu Ziyan clearly sensed the change in her mood. He hurriedly hugged her tightly and coaxed her in a low voice, Ziyuan, it's my mistake. I shouldn't have used father-in-law as a comparison. Don't worry, I don't love Rongyan. She is just my responsibility. I will only love you in this life. Chapter 997. Can't you just not marry her? In fact, there are many ways to take care of her. For example, we can find a good family for her. We can prepare a lot of dowry for her. Yan Ziyuan put forward her own opinion. Gu Ziyan secretly frowned. A few days ago, Yan Ziyuan was still obedient to him. He wanted to take Rongyan as a concubine. Although she felt uncomfortable in her heart, she did not raise any objections. She didn't even say a harsh word. What's wrong this time? Could it be that the curse on her body is about to lose its effect? It can't be. According to the benefactor, this curse can last for half a year. It's only been 20 days. Ziyuan, in fact, I don't want to marry her. But I promised her father that I would take care of her for the rest of her life. That means I will keep her by my side for the rest of my life. You don't want your husband to be a person who doesn't keep his word, do you? But, Ziyuan, you are a girl with a deep sense of righteousness. I know you will understand me and won't let me do such a treacherous thing. Don't worry, even if I take her in, I won't let her position surpass yours. She will always be a concubine, always below you. Well, there's no point in discussing this issue. Ziyuan, let's not talk about this. Don't you like my phoenix wood guqin? When we go back, I will give it to you as a wedding gift. What do you think? Gu Ziyan changed the topic. Yan Ziyuan slightly lowered her eyes and responded with a okay. Then she didn't say anything else. That spell made her listen to his every word and be loyal to him. But when she heard his words, she still felt a little uncomfortable. What she wanted was his wholehearted love, not to compete with another woman for a higher position. But almost all women were like this. She was already lucky to be able to marry the man she loved. So, if there was a little regret, then there was a little regret. She couldn't help but glance at Ning Xuema and slightly closed her eyes. Isn't Xuema also Master Han's concubine? It seems that no matter how outstanding a woman is, she can't escape this fate. Ever since Ning Xuema's cultivation had reached Earth rank level 4, her hearing had become extraordinarily good. She didn't want to eavesdrop, but her ears still reluctantly heard the conversation between the two people. In response to Gu Ziyan's words, she only had 4 words to say: get lost. What responsibility? What rules? Wasn't that just an excuse to enjoy the blessings of having 2 wives? If her man dared to take a concubine after marrying her, she would cut off his little brother and kick him out of the earth. No, she seemed to be a man's concubine. That's not right. Her status as the Almighty's concubine seemed to have been removed. She was now the Almighty's disciple. However, the Almighty's attitude towards her was not that of a disciple, but that of a man chasing after his wife. She turned around and asked Shinjioli, Guru, what do you think after listening to Child Gu's brilliant theory? Shinjioli glanced at her and said lightly, what Tom, Dick, and Harry's comments are my thoughts. Ning Xuema. She forgot that the Almighty was high and mighty. He didn't care about the gratitude and grudges of the human world. All the rules of the human world were bullshit to him. She hugged his arm. Guru, let's not care about his theory. Let me ask you, if there was a woman in this world who was your responsibility and you promised to take care of her for the rest of her life, but you didn't love her, would you marry her? Chapter 998. Shinjioli was a straightforward man. There is no woman in this world that I don't like and promise to take care of for the rest of my life. He would not look for trouble like this. What if? Shinjioli looked at her as if he was looking at an idiot. Of course not. He had thousands of ways to promise to take care of a person for the rest of their life. He would not choose the one that would put himself in danger. Ning Xuema was satisfied with his answer. She was about to ask something else when she suddenly heard the roar of a bear coming from afar. Her heart skipped a beat and she looked up. She saw a man and a bear fighting on a piece of ice far away. Yi Feng. He went to hunt a bear. Ning Xuema took a few glances from afar before her heart sank. It was a big white bear that looked like a polar bear but was 3 times bigger than a polar bear. It was actually a level 3 Earth rank beast and knew how to use earth magic. When it waved its claws, countless stones were thrown at Yi Feng like a storm. Yi Feng was a sharkman. He practiced water magic. Earth restrained water, so the big white bear's magic could restrain him. Therefore, Yi Feng was having a hard time fighting with it. This big white bear was the overlord of this place. Even the sharks in the sea did not dare to provoke it. Even the great white shark would take a detour when it saw it. It was used to running amok in this place. Who would have thought that someone would dare to provoke it? This place was deserted. The big white bear had never seen a human before. Of course, it had never seen shark men who were supposed to live in the warm sea in the south. Originally, it wanted to take a rest after gnawing on a huge fish that weighed a few hundred kilograms. Later, it discovered that there were a few figures that it had never seen before. It felt that it was quite strange, so it rode on the floating ice and wanted to take a look. It wanted to see what exactly dared to stay in its territory and not leave. At the same time, it wanted to show off its power. However, it did not expect that before it could see the face of the unknown object, Yifeng would suddenly jump out of the water and directly attack it with a water sword. Although Yifeng was frozen stiff in the water, his attack was still very fast. His sword pierced the big white bear's head. Yifeng's thunderous sword strike did not cause any damage to the big white bear's skin and flesh. It only caused a slight pain in its head. The big white bear was stunned. It had been attacked. The overlord's dignity was actually being challenged. The big white bear was furious, and its roar was earth-shattering. His figure moved as if he was flying, and he began to fight with Yifeng. Ning Xuema stared at it for a moment before her eyes widened. Weren't bears supposed to be clumsy? Why was this one as agile as a monkey? The bear jumped up and down like lightning. Chapter 999. Ning Xuema thought about it and felt that it was right, so she felt relieved. Why would Yifeng provoke that perverted bear for no reason? A question flashed through Ning Xuema's mind, but she immediately thought of something and her expression changed slightly. Bear skin. Yifeng must have seen that Yan Ziyuan was freezing, so he went to hunt for bear skin for her. If that was the case, with Yifeng's personality, he wouldn't give up so easily. The commotion over there was naturally heard by Yan Ziyuan and Gu Ziyan. Yan Ziyuan couldn't help but look over there for a moment. Her cultivation wasn't high enough, so she couldn't see the battle clearly. After looking for a while, she couldn't see anything and became impatient. Why did he go and provoke that bear for no reason? We still have to hurry on with our journey, but he just had to go and stir up trouble. Her tone was full of blame. Although Ning Xuema was her friend, when she heard her complaints, she couldn't help but feel unfair for Yifeng. He went to hunt for bear skin for you. Yan Ziyuan was stunned. She was a young miss who grew up in the courtyard, so she didn't know a lot of life knowledge. She was puzzled. Why did he go and hunt for bear skin? Why did he go and hunt for bear skin? Bear skin is warm, my young miss. Ning Xuema couldn't help but hold her forehead. This kind of bear skin is the warmest. He saw that you were cold, so, Yan Ziyuan was stunned. Her heart felt like it had been stabbed by a sharp thorn. But then something spread in her heart, and the familiar irritability rushed to the top of her head. She almost blurted out, who wants him to be a busybody? This person always likes to make his own decisions. Ziyuan, he should be used to being your secret guard. Protecting the master and making the master as comfortable as possible is the duty of a secret guard. He also did it for our good, so you can't blame him. Gu Ziyan put his arm around Yan Ziyuan's waist. His words seemed reasonable, but it was obvious that he was deliberately distorting Yifeng's feelings and deliberately treating him as a servant. He seemed to be understanding, but it made people want to slap him. Ning Xuema sneered, what nonsense are you talking about? He was not used to being a secret guard, but to protecting Ziyuan. Unlike someone who can't even deal with his fiancée, Lang. He only knows how to speak sarcastically when others put in effort. Gu Ziyan froze. He knew that Ning Xuema was not on good terms with him. She had barely spoken to him along the way. But at least she had not embarrassed him. He thought that she would tolerate him for Yan Ziyuan's sake, but he didn't expect her to speak so harshly to him now. He opened his mouth to refute, but he couldn't find the words to say. He was a little embarrassed, and after a while, he sighed, it's my fault. My body is in such a bad state, but I caused Ziyuan to suffer with me. I can see her cold, but I can't do anything for her. His words were too pitiful. Yen Ziyuan couldn't bear to see him embarrassed. Zian, you don't have to say that. I came with you willingly. Your body is in such a state, so naturally you can't do anything for me. I won't blame you. Ziyuan, I knew you were a good girl who understood the principle of righteousness. Gu Zian breathed a sigh of relief, with an expression that said, only Yen Ziyuan knows me well. The two of them were affectionate when Ning Xuema said coldly, Gu Zian, there's only one thing you can do for her, and that is to shut your sarcastic mouth. Gu Zian, Yen Ziyuan couldn't help but say, Xuema, you shut up too. Ning Xuema's temperament was cold, and her eyes flashed with coldness. Yen Ziyuan, if you speak up for him again, I'll cut off all ties with you and never care about you again. Chapter 1000. Yen Ziyuan was speechless. Ning Xuema turned around and walked away. She didn't want to stand with them anymore. She didn't want to be annoyed. If she didn't know that Yen Ziyuan was bewitched by a curse, which was why she was so infatuated with Gu Zian, she would have really cut off all ties with her just because she spoke up for Gu Zian without distinguishing right from wrong. Are you angry? Shinjiuli pulled her to sit beside him. No. Ning Xuema shook her head. She wasn't someone who got angry easily. She just felt sad for Yifeng. The specialty of the twin life curse is that the person under the curse will be loyal to the person who cast the curse. No matter how bad the person is, they will always be good in her heart. She won't allow anyone to say anything bad about them. Also, the person under the curse will have a change in personality. Shinjiuli used telepathy to explain the knowledge of this curse to her. Ning Xuema sighed. This curse is really scary. Which pervert taught him this method? After I break the curse on Ziyuan, I must interrogate this Gu Zian properly. The two of them talked while paying attention to Yifeng's movements. Yifeng seemed to be fighting with the big white bear. Although he was losing, he didn't retreat at all. Oh no, he's injured. Ning Xuema suddenly stood up. She was about to ask Shinjiuli to send her over. However, Yifeng stumbled on the big ice block and fell into the sea. The big white bear was also a vengeful person. It immediately jumped into the sea. After a while, the sea started to churn violently. It was obvious that Yifeng and the big white bear were fighting fiercely at the bottom of the sea again. Ning Xuema looked at Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli stood there unmoved. He just said calmly, he can give up. Yen Ziyuan sat there. She also looked at the sea. Naturally, she also saw the commotion there. Huge waves came one after another. She did not know why, but her heart was beating so fast, and she was secretly clenching her fists even tighter. That sea region was in chaos for a full hour, and then a huge bear head popped out and roared at the sky, shaking the clouds in the sky. Then, it sank. The surface of the water gradually regained its tranquility. Who won? Why hasn't Yifeng come out yet? Yen Ziyuan stared at the sea, her heart sinking bit by bit as time passed. Ziyuan? Are you still cold? Gu Zian held her in his arms. Why are you shaking so much? Yen Ziyuan took a deep breath and did not respond to him. His eyes were still fixed on the sea. Gu Zian suddenly turned her around and looked into her eyes. Ziyuan, look at me. Yen Ziyuan was forced to look at him, but her eyes were trembling. She could not help but turn back to look. Ziyuan, do you still remember when we first met? Gu Zian began to softly reminisce with her about the past. His voice was gentle and light, but it had a strange power to calm people's hearts. Finally, Yen Ziyuan's trembling eyes calmed down and became dreamy again, as if she was immersed in a beautiful future. She looked at Gu Zian with her eyes gradually focused and showed her infatuation. Ziyuan, when we go back, we will hold the wedding. Don't worry, I will give you an equally big wedding. You are going to marry me, right? I have always liked Xian, and I have always wanted to marry you. I want to be Xian's bride. Yen Ziyuan said dreamily. Well, that's a good girl. Gu Xian kissed her forehead. He raised his head occasionally and met Shinjuli's cold, piercing gaze. Chapter 1001. Gu Xian shuddered and quickly averted his gaze. He was so nervous that his heart almost jumped out of his chest. Shinjuli retracted his gaze and pressed his palm on Ning Xuema's shoulder. Ning Xuema was staring at the sea, waiting for Yifeng to emerge. She had already deduced that Yifeng had won the battle at the bottom of the sea based on the roar of the big white bear. Now, she was just waiting for Yifeng to return triumphantly. Shinjuli's touch hurt her a little. She raised her hand and patted him. Stop fooling around. Her eyes were still staring at the sea. This girl was actually so nervous about another man. Shinjuli was a little unhappy. He put more force on his palm and said coldly in her ear, Xuema, if your good friend can never break the curse, will you be very sad? Ning Xuema immediately turned around. Of course. She looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? Did something happen to Ziyuan again? Didn't you say that the curse will be broken soon? Her series of questions naturally represented her attitude. Shinjuli said lightly, if there are no accidents, the curse will be broken. Then why did you ask that just now? Ning Xuema was unusually sharp. I want to kill someone. Shinjuli glanced at Gu Xian again. This was the first time he had scruples about killing someone. Ning Xuema thought for a while and suddenly understood. She asked him softly, if I kill him, will Yen Ziyuan's curse never be broken? This girl was smart enough. Shinjuli nodded to show that she was right. He added, not only can it not be broken, but if the caster of the curse encounters an accident, the person who is cursed will also die. Pervert. Ning Xuema cursed softly. Before Yen Ziyuan's curse was broken, he had to keep Gu Xian alive. Guru, who do you think is the pervert behind this? Shinjuli paused for a moment before he finally spat out 3 words, Shuilan. Ning Xuema raised her eyebrows in surprise. It's him. Why would he do that? He glanced at the surface of the sea again to see if Yifeng had returned. Shinjuli pulled her to sit down. There's no need to look. Yifeng is fine. He's just a little injured. He then explained, Gu Xian is the reincarnation of a zither boy. He has a strand of zither soul in his body, which can purify and repair all zither strings in this world. Shuilan must be in urgent need of this strand of zither soul, which is why he helped him. He used the twin life curse to exchange for Gu Xian's zither soul. Ning Xuema was a little suspicious. I think with Shuilan's personality, he doesn't seem like someone who likes to exchange with others. Instead, he just directly snatches it. Shinjuli looked at her with a faint smile on his face. You seem to know him well. Yes, if this zither soul could be used to snatch, Shuilan naturally wouldn't waste this effort. However, there is something strange about this zither soul. It must be Gu Xian who voluntarily forced the zither soul out of his body. Only then can it be complete and have the function of repairing zither strings. So that's how it is. So it's that bastard's doing again. Ning Xuema couldn't help but rub her eyebrows. This Shuilan was really like a ghost that wouldn't go away. He always appeared around her from time to time. If he wasn't here to harm her, he would harm her friends. Splash. With a sound, Yifeng finally emerged from the sea. He was dragging a large bearskin behind him. It turned out that he didn't emerge from the sea for a long time because he went down to peel the bearskin. His face was a little pale. When he came to the island, he paused for a moment under the water. He closed his eyes slightly, then jumped up and flew up with the bearskin. Chapter 1002. When he landed, he staggered a little, but he quickly steadied himself. His eyes swept over Yen Ziyuan, paused for a moment, and then looked away. Yifeng, how are you? Ning Xuema had already keenly noticed that Yifeng was injured, but he was originally dressed in black, and his whole body was dripping wet, so she really couldn't see where the blood stains were. Sorry for making you worry, Yifeng is fine. If you know that others will be worried, then don't try to show off. Yen Ziyuan suddenly interrupted in a sharp voice. Her voice was as cold as the surrounding seawater. Why did you go hunting a bear for no reason? Yen Ziyuan didn't know why, but when she saw Yifeng like this, she inexplicably became angry. Can you not make decisions on your own in the future? The more she spoke, the angrier she became. You caused everyone to worry. You wasted everyone's time. We still have to hurry on our way later. Her words made Yifeng's face turn even paler. Ziyuan, don't be angry. Gu Ziyan stepped forward to smooth things over. His eyes lightly glanced at the bearskin. Brother Yi, you're so skilled. You actually managed to kill this ice field's little conqueror. I was lucky. Yifeng only answered him with 2 words, and then threw a large piece of bear meat at him. Child Gu, roast this meat. Eating it can help to resist the cold. Gu Ziyan looked at the large piece of bloody bear meat and frowned in disgust. The bear meat is very rough. I'm afraid you won't be able to bite through it. No, this kind of bear meat is quite tender, and it has a hot nature. It can be used to replenish the body's heat. Yifeng had already begun to clean the bearskin on the ice. He used the ice blade to scrape it while explaining to Gu Ziyan. Yifeng had already seen that Yen Ziyuan didn't eat much, and in this place where a drop of water turned into ice, if she didn't have good food to replenish her energy, her body wouldn't last more than a few days. And she was definitely hungry. Gu Ziyan still didn't feel at ease. Hot nature. I'm afraid that it will affect my body. Yifeng finally stared at him. You can roast it for everyone to eat. Roasting meat was the most effortless. Gu Ziyan should be able to do it. Gu Ziyan choked. He looked at the bear meat on the ice, and said, that's not a problem, but there's ice here. There's no firewood to roast meat. Just as he finished speaking, dozens of firewood suddenly appeared on the ground. He raised his head in astonishment and saw Ning Xuema leisurely retract her hand. Don't worry about firewood. With me here, you can get as much as you want. Yifeng Ziyan, Yifeng Yu, Yifeng why this time. Gu Ziyan couldn't find any other reason. He lowered his eyes and looked at his hands. This was a pair of hands that could play beautiful notes. These hands had not done much rough work. Ever since he relied on his zither skills to make a living, he had taken good care of these hands. Was he going to use these hands to do the rough work of cutting and roasting meat today? That gentleman stayed away from the kitchen. It was a bit degrading for him to do this. And the bear meat was bloody and looked a bit salty, and the weather was so cold. He stood in place, a little hesitant. Looking at Yen Ziyuan, he hoped that she could say a few words for him, or take the initiative to take over the rough work and be considerate of him, so that an elegant gentleman like him would have a good way out. After all, Yen Ziyuan was born as a young lady. She had lived a luxurious life since she was young, and there were many servants around her. Naturally, she wouldn't do such rough work. Chapter 1003. Of course, Yen Ziyuan did not want to take the initiative to take on this task. Not only did she not take on this task, but she also looked at him with sparkling eyes. Xian, you know how to roast meat, right? I can't wait to taste Xian's cooking. Gu Xian. He could not find a way out, so he could only force a smile and cook the bear meat. After all, he had been poor before. He had done this kind of work a long time ago, so he was not too clumsy when he did it. But because the weather was too cold, the bear meat only stayed on the ice for a short period of time before it turned into a piece of hard frozen meat. It was quite difficult to cut it. Gu Xian pressed the meat with one hand and cut it with the sword with the other. He felt pain in both hands. One was painful from the cold, and the other was painful from exhaustion. He raised his head and looked at Yan Ziyuan. He wanted to say something, but he held back. Yan Ziyuan was now focused on him, so she immediately said, Xian, do you have something to say to me? Gu Xian paused and shook his head, no. Forget it, he would educate her about women's ethics when he went back. For example, he should have a woman to serve him, wash her hands for her husband, and make soup for her in-laws. He should not say it now, so as not to make her feel disgusted. There were so many eyes looking at him now. Ziyuan, have a good rest first. I will roast the bear meat for you later to replenish your energy. Okay. Yan Ziyuan seemed to be a little touched. She squatted beside him to keep him company, and at the same time, she was also a little warmer by the campfire. Yi Feng, you are still bleeding. Ning Xuemo, who was not far away, said coldly, you don't even care about your life to hunt this bear. It's okay, I know what I'm doing. It's just a flesh wound. Yi Feng said calmly. His chest and abdomen were injured. He had already healed himself at the bottom of the sea and stopped the bleeding, but when he jumped up just now, he pulled at the wound and it opened up again. Ning Xuemo glanced at Yan Ziyuan and saw that she was looking at them. She looked at Yi Feng for a while, then looked away. Gu Xian's fingers also paused, and he turned to Yi Feng and smiled apologetically, Brother Yi, you have suffered because of us. Thank you. Yi Feng did not look up, he only said a few words, it's okay. Gu Xian took out a tube of medicine and asked Yan Ziyuan to give it to Yi Feng. Brother Ye's injuries are not light. This medicine is the best medicine in Daliang City and is worth thousands of gold pieces. Brother Yi can use it to heal his injuries. Use it. Ning Xuemo flicked her finger, and a bottle of medicine with a red glow appeared in Yi Feng's hand. Yi Feng held the bottle of medicine and froze. Everyone's eyes were focused on the bottle of medicine. Chapter 1004. This girl actually gave away the thing that he had just given her not long ago. That red glowing medicine really did have a golden glowing effect. Not long after Yi Feng used it, all the wounds on his body quickly healed and the pain was no longer as unbearable. He immediately began to process the bear skin. After cleaning it, he cut out 3 pieces. Shark men were good at weaving. They could use starlight and moonlight as threads to weave beautiful shark's yarn. Yi Feng also had this skill. He used Sharkman's origin energy to turn the starlight into threads and sewed the 3 pieces of bear skin together. An hour later, he had finished making the 3 bear skin coats. The big white bear seemed to have become a spirit. It loved cleanliness, so its fur was not as dirty as ordinary bear skins. Its silver-white fur shone like satin under the starlight. The 3 bear skin coats looked warm and thick. They looked very good. He gave the 3 bear skin coats to Ning Xuemo, Yan Ziyuan, and Gu Xian. Gu Xian was feeling uncomfortable from the cold, so he naturally did not refuse. He quickly put them on. Yan Ziyuan held the bear skin coat and was stunned for a moment. Then she slowly put it on. The coat was very fitting. The thick bear skin did not seem too bulky on her body. This bear skin was indeed very warm. Not long after she put it on, she could feel waves of warmth coming from it. His hands and feet, which were originally cold, gradually warmed up. She did not know what to feel. It was warm and painful at the same time. Something seemed to be rising from the depths of her heart. "All right, the bear meat is done. Everyone, come and eat." Gu Ziyan spoke and broke Yan Ziyuan's trance. He put a piece of roasted bear meat in her hand. "Come, try a piece first. See how your husband's cooking is." As soon as he spoke, the strange warm and sour feeling that had just risen in Yan Ziyuan's heart was chased away. Yan Ziyuan took a bite of the bear meat and praised, "It's very delicious. Ziyan, I didn't expect you to be so good at cooking." Gu Ziyan was a little proud. He glanced at Yi Feng beside him, then raised his hand to ruffle Yan Ziyuan's hair. He said gently, "Ziyuan, if it weren't for this accident, you would already be my wife. You should change the way you address me." Yan Ziyuan blushed. "After all, we are not married yet." She stood up and gave the rest of the bear meat to the other three. "Have a taste." Shenjiuli naturally wouldn't eat it. He didn't even have the intention to take it. Yan Ziyuan did not dare to force him. As for Ning Xuemo, she did not want to eat the food that Gu Ziyan roasted. Besides, she was already full and had no appetite, so she waved her hand and refused. Only Yi Feng could not bear to refuse the bear meat that Yan Ziyuan handed over. He took a bite and secretly frowned. The meat was a little overcooked, and there was a little too much salt on it. Not only did it not suit his taste, but it also did not suit Yan Ziyuan's taste. Yan Ziyuan was a picky eater. In fact, he doubted that Yan Ziyuan could really eat until she was full. "Is it delicious?" Yan Ziyuan looked at him eagerly, as if she wanted to get a compliment from him about her sweetheart. Yan Ziyuan was now in a state where she would be happy as long as she was with her sweetheart, even if she ate chaff and swallowed vegetables. Yi Feng could not bear to make her sad, so he nodded and replied, "It's okay." Yan Ziyuan was finally satisfied and returned to Gu Ziyan's side. She tasted the bear meat that was not roasted very well in small bites and ate it very happily. His body trembled as if he was suffering from malaria, and he fell to the ground with a plop. "Look, your illness is flaring up, right?" Ning Xuema took a step back, shook her head, and sighed, "You just don't believe me." Yan Ziyuan looked at Gu Ziyan's twitching body on the ground and panicked. "Xuema, what should we do? What should we do? You have to save him. Take off his bearskin robe first and let him dry here for a while. Maybe he'll get better soon." Yan Ziyuan immediately took off the bearskin robe on Gu Ziyan's body. She was afraid that it was not enough, so she let him lie on the ice. Ning Xuema took the robe and handed it to Yi Feng. "Yi Feng, you can wear this robe yourself. Child Gu does not have the fortune to enjoy it." Yi Feng looked at Ning Xuema with a complicated gaze. Chapter 1006. Yi Feng naturally knew that this was Ning Xuema's doing, but it made him feel a lot better. He put on the bearskin without hesitation. Naturally, he warmed up a lot, and his blood vessels that had been frozen by the cold sea water could finally flow normally again. Yi Feng had given the bearskin to Gu Ziyan because he was afraid that Yan Ziyuan would be unhappy. He was afraid that she would throw a tantrum when she saw that there was no one she liked. After the scene just now, he no longer had any misgivings. Gu Ziyan had finally warmed up in the bearskin. Now that it was suddenly taken away and placed on the ice, he was frozen to the point of ecstasy. He was shivering on the ground. Xuemo, why isn't he feeling well?" Yan Ziyuan anxiously circled Gu Ziyan. "It doesn't matter. When the heat poison in his body is absorbed by the cold air, he should be able to recover." Ning Xuemo's tone was certain. Then, she glanced at Shinjiuli. The goo poison in Gu Xian's body was planted by the Almighty, so he could naturally control his condition at any time. He didn't even move, but he cooperated perfectly with Ning Xuemo. He still didn't say anything, but his fingertips moved slightly in his sleeves. Yan Ziyuan was an impatient person. She pulled Ning Xuemo's hand and asked, "Xuemo, how can we make the heat poison in his body disappear faster?" Ning Xuemo looked at the turbulent sea water under the island and muttered, "Maybe it'll be better if we use seawater to bathe him." Damn it, she also wanted to let this Gu Xian have a taste of the ice sea. Yi Feng saw that Ning Xuemo was playing with Gu Xian. Although he was happy to see it, he was afraid that she would kill him and cause other accidents. He sent a message to Xuemo. "Xuemo, I'm afraid his body can't withstand the water. He will freeze to death in the sea." Ning Xuemo also sent a message to him. "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." She was a doctor, so she could understand the general condition of Gu Xian's body and his tolerance by checking his breathing. His body was not as weak as it appeared. This bastard looked weak. Firstly, he was acting in front of Yan Ziyuan. Secondly, he was delicate and didn't want to work, so he took advantage of the situation to pretend to be Brother Lin. "I'm afraid he won't be able to swim by himself in this state." Yan Ziyuan muttered to herself. She then made up her mind, "I'll take him down to soak." This silly girl. With her small body, if she soaked in the sea water, she would probably fall sick. Before Ning Xuemo could say anything, Yi Feng said, "No way. If he wants to soak, I'll take him in." He would never allow anything to happen to Yan Ziyuan, and he didn't want her to suffer any more pain. "Stupid, why do you need to soak him in the water? Can't you just pour water on him?" Ning Xuemo couldn't help but facepalm. She didn't say that she was going to throw Gu Xian into the water. These two people were so quick to snatch this job. Yan Ziyuan's eyes lit up. She immediately looked at Yi Feng. "Yi Feng, you can control water, right? Why don't you get some water and pour it on him?" "Pour water on him? I can do that." The little Qilin, who had just reached the shore, answered in high spirits. Without waiting for Ning Xuemo and the others to respond, it opened its big mouth and the seawater below automatically surged up and splashed down on Gu Xian, who was trembling on the ground to the point of almost losing consciousness. Shinjiuli took advantage of the situation and silently withdrew the spell that had made Gu Xian unconscious. Gu Xian was shocked by the cold seawater and jumped up like a shrimp in a pot of oil. Cold. 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 Chapter 1007. Gu Xian's hands and feet were frozen stiff. Just as he jumped up, he tripped and tumbled down. Because the weather was too cold, his clothes were already frozen. He couldn't stop the momentum of the fall and slipped far away. Yan Ziyuan didn't manage to catch him, and could only look on helplessly as he screamed miserably and fell into the sea with a splash. "Xian!" Yan Ziyuan was scared out of her wits. She subconsciously wanted to jump as well, but Yi Feng stopped her. "Don't be afraid. Let me do it." He turned around and was about to jump into the sea to save Gu Xian, but Kirin was one step ahead of him. She also jumped into the sea with a splash. After a while, Kirin used her head to push Gu Xian out of the sea. Gu Xian was choking and freezing in the sea. His face was pale, his lips were bruised, and his eyes were tightly shut. This time, he really fainted. Yi Feng didn't wait for Yan Ziyuan to speak again and immediately performed first aid. He was very experienced in saving drowning people. After a while, Gu Xian finally woke up. As soon as he woke up, he shivered and stared at Yan Ziyuan's white bear fur coat. He couldn't wait to tear it off for her and put it on himself. Yen Ziyuan naturally knew that he was cold. She felt cold just looking at him with ice shards all over his body. However, for his health, she still advised him to endure it. Zian, your body really can't get too hot. You will faint if you get too hot. You almost died just now. If I didn't let the cold air draw out the heat toxins in your body in time, you would still be unconscious. You have to endure it. As long as you find the ice flame flower, you will be fine after consuming it. Gu Xian's lips trembled a few times. He felt that he would freeze to death before he could find the ice flame flower. Now, from the tip of his hair to the soles of his feet, every cell in his body was screaming the word cold. Every blood vessel in his body was flowing with the word cold. Many parts of his body were so cold that he couldn't feel them. He couldn't even feel the existence of his little brother, cold. He had never been so cold in his entire life. He never knew that falling into the water in this weather could be so cold. He felt that all the joints in his body were about to freeze. Every time he moved, they would make cracking sounds. Because his clothes were already frozen stiff, he was like a robot that couldn't support his body. Ziyuan, help me, get a set of clothes. Even if he couldn't wear the bearskin robe, at the very least, he had to change into dry clothes. Otherwise, he might really freeze to death. Yen Ziyuan, however, was afraid that her previous efforts would be wasted if she didn't do it well. She immediately looked at Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo scrutinized Gu Xian's face. She couldn't play with him anymore, or she would die, she nodded. You can change into dry clothes, but they can't be too thick. Chapter 1008. But when the great god was dressed like this, no one felt cold for him. It was as if he was supposed to be like this, like a celestial being on top of a snowy mountain. Although Yen Ziyuan couldn't see Shinjuli's appearance clearly, she could still feel his aura. Although that person was traveling with them, he always felt like he was beyond the 9 heavens, separated from them by thousands of mountains and rivers. It made her feel like she was looking up at a tall mountain, and she never dared to treat him as a companion. How did Master Han cultivate this kind of temperament and strength of character? Perhaps only the venerable emperor could be compared to him. Ning Xuemo seemed to understand Yen Ziyuan's thoughts at this moment. Her man was praised by her good friend, and she was very proud. But her heart was moved, and she immediately took the opportunity to persuade Yen Ziyuan, Ziyuan, the great god's physique belongs to the cold, and he can't be cold. His cultivation is shallow, and he often cultivated in places like the ice fields to improve his resistance to the cold. After a long time, his aura was revealed, and now he's not afraid of the cold. Yen Ziyuan's eyes lit up. She saw the interaction between Ning Xuemo and the great god with her own eyes. The two of them were so close, so it wasn't strange that Ning Xuemo knew about Master Han's past. So she believed that what Ning Xuemo said was true. She immediately persuaded Gu Xian, who was about to change his jacket into a cotton-padded one. She told him about Master Han's cultivation, and then pulled Gu Xian's ice-cold hand. Xian, what Master Han can do, you're so smart, so you can definitely do it too. Just bear with it, and wait until you get used to it. Gu Xian was so cold that his joints were stiff. When he heard Yen Ziyuan's words, he almost burst into tears. How could he be compared to Master Han? He would probably be frozen to death if he got used to it. He didn't listen to Yen Ziyuan and limped towards the car. He wanted to rely on himself to take his clothes. Unfortunately, the red-crowned crane was too tall. It was almost as tall as a one-story building. If he was fine, he could easily jump onto the crane. However, his joints were as stiff as wood, and he could barely walk like a robot. There was no way he could jump onto a vehicle. He tried twice but to no avail. He turned around and looked at Yen Ziyuan with a face full of despair. Ziyuan, if you don't want me to die, help me, get a set of cotton robes. He was so cold that his tongue was almost tied up. Yen Ziyuan's heart softened when she saw how pitiful he looked. She looked at Ning Xuemo again. Ning Xuemo didn't say anything. She just glanced at Yifeng. Yifeng had also just jumped out of the frozen sea not long ago. When he came ashore, his limbs were also stiff. Even his hair was frozen into ice. However, he didn't say that he was cold. He even did this and that for them. Chapter 1009. Gu Ziyan. He looked at Yen Ziyuan, who had been looking at him. I'm sincere to Ziyuan, but you guys make it sound so easy. Yen Ziyuan made up her mind and said, Ziyan, you have to bear with it. Otherwise, I'll accompany you. She raised her hand and was about to take off the bearskin coat. Yifeng's expression changed. No. Ning Xuemo raised her hand and pressed Yen Ziyuan's hand down. She said with a faint smile, Ziyuan, don't be silly. Your physique is completely different from his. You can't bear any cold. Otherwise, if the cold enters your body, you'll have all kinds of problems. Child Gu is already very touched and happy that you accompanied him to this wasteland to look for medicine. How can he bear to let you freeze for no reason? If you get sick from the cold, he'll be heartbroken. Don't you think so? Child Gu. The last sentence was naturally directed at Gu Ziyan. What could Gu Ziyan say at this time? He could only force a smile with his teeth chattering. Yes. Ziyuan, you don't have to take it off. I'll bear with it. Yen Ziyuan finally stopped insisting. The small storm passed just like that. 3 of the 5 people were wrapped in warm bearskin coats. As for the other 2, one disdained to wear it, and the other couldn't wear it. Therefore, Gu Ziyan, who couldn't wear it, could only rely on exercise to increase his body temperature in order to resist the bone-piercing cold. As a result, child Gu Ziyan, who was originally gentle and calm even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, jumped a few times on the spot as if there were springs installed under his butt. His image was completely destroyed. Yen Ziyuan's gaze followed Gu Ziyan, and she couldn't help but glance at Yifeng. It turned out that he was just as cold when he jumped into the sea, but he was able to persevere without batting an eyelid. He even did so many things. Yifeng was like a silent mountain, giving people a feeling of wanting to lean on him. On the other hand, Gu Ziyan was like a blooming flower. He was beautiful and attractive, but he could wither easily. Yen Ziyuan shook her head. No, Gu Ziyan was the man she had always liked. He would be her pillar in the future. She shouldn't use him as an analogy. Compared to him, all other men should be dung. Her gaze continued to follow Gu Ziyan. Everyone rested here for 4 to 5 hours before making their preparations. The cold weather caused people's physical strength to be depleted abnormally fast. Those who did not abstain from food were hungry again. Ning Xuemo pressed down on Shinjiuli's hand that was about to reach for the food and suggested, I heard that there is a type of fish here that is especially delicious. Yifeng, your grilled fish skills are pretty good. Why don't you show off your skills here? Little Apple, go down and catch the fish. When she suggested this, Yifeng's heart skipped a beat. Chapter 10:10. Now that he had seen this fish again, Yifeng recalled the scene from back then and felt an inexplicable complicated feeling in his heart. Yifeng's heartstrings couldn't help but tremble. He could finally roast the fish that she wanted to eat the most with his own hands. He had just slaughtered 2 fish when Gu Ziyan suddenly walked over, took the other 2 fish, and silently slaughtered them as well. Naturally, his technique wasn't as nimble as Yifeng's. He scraped the scales off the fish's skin and ruined the fish's beauty. Yifeng's heart ached for the fish, and he couldn't help but say, "You don't have to do it. I'll roast it for everyone to eat." Gu Ziyan glanced at him and smiled. "Brother Yi has been too busy for us recently. I can't bear to see Brother Yi so tired, so I'll roast the fish for us." After saying that, he took the 2 slaughtered fish and slowly roasted them over the bonfire. Yifeng. He couldn't help but look at Yan Ziyuan. Yan Ziyuan was already squatting beside Gu Ziyan. Her eyes were bright as she watched him roast the fish, and her face was full of sweetness. "Ziyan, you're so thoughtful. I love eating the food you roast the most." Yifeng couldn't help but cut his hand in a moment of distraction. Blood flowed out and flowed onto the fish that he had just slaughtered. "This fish is dirty," he said hurriedly, and threw the fish that was stained with his blood back into the sea. He stood facing the sea for a while, and when he turned back, his expression was still calm as he prepared the other fish. Although Ning Xuemo felt sorry for him in her heart, this was not the time for her to meddle in his affairs. She didn't look at Yifeng again, in case he felt even more embarrassed. For someone like Yifeng, what he wanted was never the pity of others. Yifeng and Gu Ziyan grilled the fish separately. Gu Ziyan also seemed to be holding his breath. The grilled fish was neither salty nor bland, and the control of the heat was also good. After grilling it, he handed it to Yan Ziyuan. Yan Ziyuan beamed with joy after taking a bite. This fish was much better than the bear meat. She immediately started eating in big mouthfuls, eating with great relish. Yifeng's fish was also ready. He gave it to Shinjiuli and Ning Xuemo first. This time, Shinjiuli did not refuse and took it. Ning Xuemo also took the one that was handed to her. The taste was unprecedentedly delicious. She gave him a thumbs up. "Yifeng, your grilling skills are comparable to that of a chef." She casually picked up the other grilled fish and walked over to Yan Ziyuan. "Ziyuan, come, try this. Is it as delicious as I said?" Yan Ziyuan was slightly stunned. Just as she was about to take it, Gu Ziyan handed her another fish. "Ziyuan, I added another seasoning to this fish. Try it and see if it's different from the previous one." Yan Ziyuan naturally wouldn't refuse him. She took it and took a bite. She nodded. "Not bad. It's delicious." Chapter 10-11. After eating the fish, the few of them continued on their journey. Ning Xuemo and Shinjiuli were still riding on Kirin's back. After Ning Xuemo finished another round of cultivation, she lay in the Almighty's arms and said gloomily, "Almighty, the fate between Yifeng and Yan Ziyuan is really shallow." Yifeng wanted to let Yan Ziyuan eat his grilled fish, but he couldn't even fulfill such a small wish. Shinjiuli said, "In this world, most things don't go your way." Yifeng and Yan Ziyuan originally had fate, but in order to let Yiyu reincarnate, he sacrificed their fate. Then what we're doing now, is there still no possibility between them? It's hard to say. Right now, everything is unknown. Shinjiuli shook his head. In any case, it's better than having no fate at all. Ning Xuemo sighed deeply. She suddenly thought of something and looked up at the Almighty. "Almighty, are we fated to be together?" Shinjiuli paused, looked down at her and asked, "What do you think?" Ning Xuemo giggled. "I guess it's fate. It seems like I can't avoid you no matter where I go. Our fates might be intertwined. There are so many fates that I can't count them all." Shinjiuli was speechless. She made it sound like he would always stick to her. The fate between him and her, it seemed like even he couldn't see it. However, it should be fate, right? When she had just transmigrated, she had asked him for help, when he was cultivating in Tianshu Mountain, no one could go up, but she had barged in and even witnessed his most embarrassing moment. Of course, since he had taken a fancy to her, even if the heavens didn't arrange fate for them, he would snatch it back even if he had to snatch it. The person that Shinjuli wanted would never run away. Almighty, you like me, right? Ning Xuemo put her arms around his neck. Once she had confirmed her feelings for him, she didn't want to delay any longer. She wouldn't try to resist him either. Fate was a very mysterious thing. Once fate came, one had to grasp it properly and not let it slip away. Opportunities were like this, and so was fate. Therefore, Ning Xuemo wanted to confirm it. Shinjuli twirled the hair on her temples with his hand. Do you still need to ask? If he didn't like her, he wouldn't have followed her every step like he was her follower. This was the first time he had stared at someone so closely. Then when are you going to marry me? Ning Xuemo's eyes sparkled. Shinjuli's fingers, which were twining her hair, paused slightly. His eyes were deep. Why do you ask this? Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows. Since the two of you are in love with each other, you should naturally get married. Let's have a couple and return home together. Don't tell me you never planned to marry me. Of course he was going to marry her. However, he couldn't say it until the time was right. Looking at Ning Xuemo's eyes that were as bright as stars, Shinjuli felt apologetic for the first time. Chapter 10-12. This time, Shinjuli shook his head quickly. No. You think too much. I have never married anyone. As soon as he said this, a conversation with a vague voice suddenly appeared in his mind. Divine Lord, don't you like me? What do you think? I think you don't like me. Otherwise, why don't you want to be with me once? Be more reserved. Don't you feel embarrassed saying such things every day? I only say this to you. You are my husband. It doesn't matter if I say it a few more times. You. Who taught you this? Stop it. Divine Lord, since we love each other, isn't it normal to be together? Come on. We need to get married. I am not a casual person. Then let's get married. I want to marry you. Shinjuli's body slightly stiffened. The conversation that suddenly appeared in his mind was too vague. He almost couldn't tell if it was a male or female voice, but strangely, it made his chest hurt. He frowned slightly. After so many years, this was the first time such a situation happened. He immediately tried his best to think about this vague voice, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember anything. There was only a blank. Even the conversation that had just rung in his mind had disappeared, leaving him unable to grasp any clues. He slightly frowned and shook his head. He didn't want to think about it anymore. He just wanted to grasp the present. As for the past, he didn't want to pursue it anymore. He pinched Ning Xuemo's face. Don't think too much. Hurry up and practice. It seemed like he really had something that he couldn't say. It was so obvious that he was beating around the bush. Ning Xuemo was a little uncomfortable. She looked at Shinjuli and didn't want to guess. She just wanted to get a definite answer from him. Do you want to marry me or not? Let's make it clear first, I don't want to be your concubine. If you want to marry me, you can only marry me. I want to be your wife. Do you agree? This girl was really difficult to deal with today. Shinjuli was helpless. Idiot, you should let the man do the marriage proposal. I am the one who wants to marry you, and you still don't want to give me an answer. If I were to wait for you to beg me, wouldn't I have to wait for God knows when? Come on, answer me. Ning Xuemo was like a bully who was forcing him to marry her. She almost grabbed his collar and forced him to agree. Shinjioli was pestered by her to the point that he had no choice but to harden his heart and say, "I will tell you when you reach Earth rank level 8. Ning Shuemo, she felt even more uncomfortable. Was it that difficult to say, yes? Why did he have to wait for her to reach level 8 before he could tell her? He was clearly delaying things. Even if the Almighty didn't want to say it, she couldn't force him to say it with a knife. Ning Shuemo didn't want herself to think too much, but she had to. Could it be that he was just teasing her because he found her fun? Naturally, Shinjioli could tell that she didn't look good, but he could only pretend that he didn't see it. He urged her, "All right, let's stop chatting. You should practice martial arts." Ning Shuemo's heart was burning with anger. She turned over and sat up in his arms, but she didn't want to meditate. She swung her small feet on Kirin's body. "I don't want to practice martial arts today." She ignored Shinjioli and only chatted with Kirin. Kirin was originally depressed because it couldn't get a word in, but now that Ning Shuemo was talking to it, it was naturally happy. It was a talkative creature. If Ning Shuemo asked one question, it could answer 10 questions. One person and one beast chatted, so it wasn't boring.